Good to go.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to the January 12th, 2021 uh, board meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. This is our first regular meeting of the year. Will you please all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to
and to the republic
for
which it stands,
One nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty,
liberty and
justice
justice
for
for
all.
all.
Thank you. And Director Lassane, may you please give us tonight's land acknowledgement?
I would be honored to. Thank you very much and Happy New Year, everyone. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish, Snohomish, and Tulalip peoples. We express our deepest respect and gratitude to the ancestors of this land, on whose shoulders we stand. In Everett Public Schools, we strive to create an equitable outcomes and build a culture of inclusive belongings for all students, teachers, staff, and community.
Thank you. Would the secretary please call the roll?
President Mason,
Present.
Vice President Lassane,
Present.
Director Berg,
Present.
Director Mitchell,
Present.
Director Nichols,
Present.
Student Representative Hussein,
Present.
Student Representative Pilch-Bassan.
Thank you. Welcome all. Our first item of business this evening, section 5.0, is the adoption of the agenda. Dr. Salzman, may you please give an overview of tonight's agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the Board of Directors and the public, good evening. Tonight's agenda contains the following: the Superintendent's report, a segment for board comments, a segment for public comments, a segment for routine business, a segment for strategic progress monitoring, segment for information discussion, segment for new business, and upcoming agenda items. Since publishing the agenda, the following changes have been made. Item 5.01, adoption of the agenda. The timing sheet was uploaded. Item 10.02, approval of the personnel report. Personnel report was updated. And items 15.01 and 15.02, upcoming meetings, the date was corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, section 6.0 is recognitions. And tonight we do not have any recognition scheduled, although I would like to take a minute to congratulate Director Berg on being sworn into the House of Representatives for our 44th Legislative District. Congratulations. And you can speak to that more when we get to our time. But for now, we're going to go to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board of Directors, and to the public. First of all, good evening and a happy, healthy new year to everybody. And I'm sure we're glad to say goodbye to 2020 and to 2021. Just a few comments this evening. Next week is, we will honor the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And no time in history, this is the best time because we should have equality for everybody. I was just saddened last week to the events that took place at our Capitol, and I was saddened for the children that I serve every day that have to watch and go through that. So as a parent, I speak to you tonight because it was a discussion that I had to have in my home, and I know that in many homes that discussion took place. I am very proud of our student body because I spoke to student leaders after that event, and we had great discussions about what occurred. So as a superintendent and as a parent, I'm proud of the students as they were able to express themselves to me as I spoke to them. And then finally, vaccines. I'm sure you've heard about it as we are entering that time right now to get vaccines. As superintendent, I'll do everything in my power to make sure that all educators can get this vaccine. I will be working with other superintendents to be drafting a letter as well to our governor to make sure that we can finalize and speed up the process to get vaccines to all educators. They are the essential people, just like our nurses and doctors, and we know the healthcare. But to get our teachers vaccinated would be quite beneficial to all communities. So I will continue to work on that. And I want to share that with the public that I have spent many hours working on that and will continue to work on that. And then for those of you that may not know this person, but if you do, great. If you don't, Carrie Johnson, who leads our nurses in our district. I can't say enough about the work that she's done the past few weeks. Every time I'm meeting with her, she's working on so many things to make sure that we can get some vouchers in place. And when you have dedicated employees like that, who you don't know who they really are, right? They work in a building and the public may not know them, but I want to honor her this evening and publicly thank her for her tireless efforts to make sure that we can get this done for our students and for our community. So I wish everybody a great evening. It will be a better 2021. And health is still important to all of us every day. So thank you.
Thank you. And I also, before we go on to board comments, wanted to note that happily Student Representative Pilch Bassan has been able to join us. So I want to make sure that we got that. Okay, now we are on to board comments and student representatives and directors. No special order. If you have something to share or would like to tell us about tonight, please go ahead and just raise your hand or something. Director Mitchell.
Yes, thank you. Today is my first day back of the year. Some of you may know I developed COVID. And I just want to advise everybody, keep your vigilance. I have been putting out there on social media as much as I could to wear a mask. I made the big mistake of allowing a family member to visit. So keep your vigilance. Thankfully, we all had mild symptoms. But what I want to say is we're talking about opening schools, and I did share this with Dr. Saltzman. We never had fevers. My only symptom was a cough and some aching muscles and joints. My husband's symptom and daughter's symptoms were sore throats with muscle aches and some sleepiness and things. And my daughter, being a kid, bounced back pretty quickly. But as we're looking at bringing kids back to school and teachers back to school, my mother-in-law arrived healthy, but then the next day developed a cough. And that was my first symptom. And usually we would send kids to school with a cough. We would send kids to school with a runny nose. I would go to work with a cough or a runny nose. But since that is a sign and turned out positive for us for COVID, I just want to really be mindful of our opening schools and what we can do in terms of symptoms and keeping people home if they have symptoms until they get a negative test. We were able to schedule tests with the county. We went out to Funco Field for a test. We also went out to the fairgrounds for a test. The county does all their tests through the University of Washington. It's a PCR test, and we were able to get our results within 24 hours. So that if somebody does have symptoms, we could send them for a test. It's free through insurance. And that we had results within 24 hours. So if somebody was negative and they had symptoms, then maybe it is just a cold. But if they're positive with symptoms per the county, you stay home for 10 days and then 24 hours until your symptoms are clear. So we did get lots of support from the county, but I'm very thankful to all my friends that gave me support. And I just really want everybody to stay vigilant against this virus because we were very, very fortunate that we only had mild symptoms. So thank you so much. And it's really glad I didn't have to miss this meeting because it is really great to be back and see that we are reopening at least our special services pretty soon. So this is really an exciting time because there is light at the end of the tunnel with this vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with all of us. I appreciate that. Are there other directors or student representatives who would like to share? Director Lasane?
Yes, I would like to make a couple comments if I may. One, I would like to say how much last week really shook me to my core. I must say that I have never ever seen anything like this before with what happened in Washington, D.C. I recall as a junior officer, I had many opportunities, quite many opportunities of walking the halls of Congress and going to the Navy liaison office there to deliver information, deliver papers. And I had the opportunity to sit in on several opportunities of overhearing resolutions being passed and bills being passed, and I just can't imagine what our members there in Congress felt that day when you had people breaking in. I knew violence happened sometimes. There have been shootings, there have been people coming in trying to do people harm, but there has never in my lifetime ever been anything like what I saw last week. And I really can't imagine having to work there on a day-to-day basis and being afraid to go to work after something like that. But right now, that's what is being felt, not just with our representatives and our senators who work there, but the staffers who work there, the people who work there for support to them. That's what they feel now. And I think that's going to be that way in the next few days. But coming back, I had the opportunity to do a video up with Jessica Cornell at Madison Elementary for Martin Luther King Day. And it's very appropriate. It's very appropriate because right now, Martin Luther King did a lot for this country, and he protested. He walked, he sat at counters, and he was arrested because of the things that, you know, he was very vocal in his ideals and his dreams for equality and social justice. But he never did it with violence that I saw on TV. He fought, but he fought with words and dreams. And he did all of that with nonviolence. And I think that's one of the things that I was able to share with the Madison students, that you can still fight for and march for and protest for in a nonviolent way for equal rights for all. And I hope we share those words with our students, and I hope we share those words with young people who are looking out for us or looking up to us as adults and trying to explain to them what happened and what should have happened and what did not happen last Wednesday. We don't have to live through those types of events. We can still protest, but we can do it non-violently. And I believe that hopefully we are here to share that with our students, and I hope we continue to share that with our students. And I thank you, Dr. Salzman, for taking the time to talk to our students about what happened. I thank you, all teachers, that will sit down and take the time to talk to them about the proper way to protest, to be able to share your what you believe is right, but to do it in a non-violent way and still uphold the Constitution and uphold the dreams that we have for equality for all. Thank you for letting me share that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Director Lasane. I appreciate it. Director Berg.
Yeah, thank you, President Mason. And thank you for the congratulations. It's been a busy week in the Berg household. And thank you to everyone just for all your kind words and support. I am a newly minted state representative, but have no fear, I will be a school board director, and it is the best job in the world. So I'll be doing this for a lot more years as well. I'm excited on the Senate side. They have the same privilege of having a sitting school board director. Senator Tawana Nobles, who is also sworn in yesterday, will continue on as a school board director as well. So it's a great combination. That said, a couple of things I wanted to share. One, to reflect on what Director Lassane said. Thank you to Principal Cornell at Madison, the folks at Silver Firs, all the different people on our different school campuses that are doing MLK Day differently and creatively this year. I think it's really powerful. You know, clearly we're not having those traditional assemblies and speakers and reflection times, but it seems like all, if not most, if not all of our schools are doing something to creatively engage their students, still bring speakers to campus, do video montages, whatever it takes to really hit the, get the message home. I think that this past week has shown us that equity work is not just a box to check, it's real. The issues that we see around equity are truly life and death issues. And when we talk about things like policing and SROs and how it's different in our different regions, right? We've had those conversations like we're policing our students differently in the North and the South. Well, we saw on Wednesday what different policing looks like last Wednesday in our nation's capital. It's life and death. It's not funny. Boys will be boys, kids will be kids. Oh, there's no big deal. It's a big deal. So as we start talking more about equity and privilege and how that manifests itself on our school campuses and with our students, let us not forget what happened in our nation's capital and how these young folks that we're helping shape and form will eventually become young adults. And if they're instilled with a sense of privilege and superiority, that will stick with them. So we have to do a better job as a district and just as a community and as a country to make sure that equity prevails in every sense. And another thing with MLK Day coming up that I think of often, folks love the touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy quotes of MLK. I love those too, right? Like his I Have a Dream speech, my kids practically can memorize it. But we also have to remember he was a social justice warrior. And he spoke like one. And so one quote that I oftentimes come to is when he said, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." So just take that to heart the next time you want to quote MLK. Maybe dig a little deeper into some of the quotes that he had that really challenged folks where they were, because I think those are the ones today that we need to remember. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. I believe that Student Representative Hussein wanted to share also.
Thank you, Mrs. Mason. And just repeating what Mrs. Lassane said and echoing everything that's been said. As a student, it did come to as a surprise and was very concerning. And a lot of students wondered if teachers were able to provide that safe space and to acknowledge that this wasn't only like a small group, this was a nationwide thing. And for my teachers, we were able to have those conversations and with no back and forth and any of those things. And even my AP Gov teacher who talks about current events, who was telling us to watch the election and all those things, took a step back and said, for me, I can't talk about this right now, and it wouldn't be the best option for me to speak on this without having an opinion. And being able to provide spaces like that, and I know there was a lot of mixed feelings about everything, but even for me, taking a step back and listening to my peers speak about something that happened in our nation was was very nice. And speaking about MLK Day, Everett High School is doing a webinar with a guest speaker. So if you need any of the Zoom codes, that will be held soon. And hopefully you guys could kind of tune in for it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the student perspective. Really appreciate that as always. Let's see, does our other student representative or Director Nichols have anything to share?
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo a lot of what Amina was saying. I think one thing you said, I'm not sure if I'm taking this out of context, was this isn't super, like, it wasn't an isolated event, and it might not have been surprising to people our age as it was for older people in our nation, because the political climate and the current events that people our age have seen for our entire lives have kind of always obviously not been quite as extreme as last week, but it's always been sort of shocking news headlines one after another. And the past year has really furthered that a lot more extremely than I had ever imagined. If you had told me that this would be the state of my life and the state of the world even a year ago, I would have laughed in your face and then probably been really worried about it. So it's just kind of another example and another thing to bring up, like the idea of like growing up and trying to figure out the world and learning in an environment like this is really difficult. And that's just something that we're lucky to live in a district that has been mindful of that and has been empathetic to what students are struggling through. But it's a hard time to be growing up. And I think that the recent schedule change to add C days to our week was kind of nice to have that break in the week, especially last week, to process everything going on. But I just think furthering ideas like that kind of manifest that empathy in like a real structured way that is helping students. And again, things like MLK parades that are educating us on what's going on and how to process it are really important. And just continuing to make these decisions with a lot of empathy for the kind of world that young people are growing up in.
Thank you. Director Nichols?
So just briefly, just wanted to welcome everybody back. I hope that you were able to get some rest over the holiday season, much needed rest, and get recharged for what's surely going to be a momentous year, as we've already seen thus far. I do want to be clear with especially any of the students that are watching, that what we saw last week is not, it may have started as protest, but it was clearly directed at our government in order to interrupt a democratic process. It was sedition. There's no two ways about it. And you have a right to protest. You have a right to redress your government for grievances. What you don't have a right to do is to try to overthrow that government. And it's a dangerous precedent, but I think I'm hopeful that our young folks that are seeing this, that they'll know that this is not right and that we can move past this, and over time we can grow together with unity, especially as we call out those things, you know, as Director Berg said, you know, equity isn't a check the box thing, right? And this goes into all parts of our life. So it's not, as far as like MLK Day and everything else, it's not just enough to learn the history. It's not just enough to be aware of all these different things. You have to live it every day. And that means standing up and calling out things that are uncomfortable, that you see in front of you. And so I hope, if nothing else, last week gave folks some courage to say, hey, that's wrong. And what's happening in society right now is wrong. And in certain parts, and anyways, in other parts, you know, stuff is there's lots of great things happening too. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that with all the chaos. So hang in there with us. Let's get through this together. Let's lean on each other.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I don't need to reiterate. I think my colleagues have said it quite articulately that last week was certainly a difficult and momentous time in our history. And I'm looking forward to moving forward into 2021. It didn't start out as I had planned or that we had planned, but we have a lot of great things happening. And this is our first meeting of the year, and I look forward to the work that we're going to do together to hopefully get some students back in our buildings and continue their education and move our district forward. So thank you all for sharing this evening. I truly appreciate all of you and what you bring to the table and the different perspectives. Okay, with that, we are going to move forward, and our next item of business is public comments. Are there any public comments this evening?
We have no public comments this evening.
Okay, thank you. That means that we are on to our consent agenda, and Dr. Salzman, may you please provide an overview of tonight's consent agenda?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. The board's consent agenda includes repetitive business items such as meeting minutes, personnel action, expense vouchers, surplus lists, gifts, grants, or current contracts. Sometimes it includes items that occur less frequently but are of a routine business nature. These items are usually reviewed by the board in the Friday report, 1 or more weeks before the board meeting. This gives directors time to ask staff questions or consider a discussion about the policy implications of those items. The board votes on the consent agenda in a single motion. By its definition, a consent agenda is not debatable. In the case of this consent agenda, the superintendent's office received no questions. The consent agenda is presented as published for board approval.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to approve tonight's consent agenda. Would any directors like to remove an item from the consent agenda and place it in new business of the agenda? Hearing no requests, we will move towards the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. The consent agenda is adopted. And in adopting the consent agenda, did I miss adopting the agenda for this evening?
We did. I don't remember a vote.
I did not vote, and that made me realize just voting now. Darlene, is it okay if we go back and approve the agenda for this evening?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as it was presented?
And second.
Okay, it was moved and seconded to adopt tonight's agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. Thank you for going back and helping me adopt tonight's agenda. Now we will jump forward. We are on to section 11, which is our strategic progress monitoring. And tonight we have a very robust math performance report. And I believe Ms. Boughton, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is kicking us off. So sorry, I'm trying to follow my agenda here on my iPad and it's bouncing around. Sorry about that. Please go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, President Mason, our directors, student representatives, Dr. Salzman, for having us here to present this evening. Mr. Mike McCarthy, my math director, is going to assist me in our presentation tonight. And we are excited to provide you updates this evening on some math performance and specifically on the actions that we are engaging in to support current and future academic growth for math for all students in Everett Public Schools. This evening, just to overview our presentation, we're going to take a look at some student achievement data. And that's really the why. It's what drives our work. Where are our students performing? What do we need to do differently? We're going to share the key priorities and actions that we're taking to shift universal instruction and interventions, and we call that the what. And we'll also provide examples of rigorous and engaging math instruction in remote learning. So the how. Instruction's really changed, of course, in remote instruction. We want to share with you some of the things that our very creative staff are doing to help all of our students achieve in math this year. Today's KPIs or key performance indicators that we're highlighting are listed here, but what I'd really like to do is call out that first KPI, 11C, Because in Everett Public Schools, we take a lot of pride in an exceptional graduation rate. 96% is pretty amazing. However, what I'd really like to call out here in that first KPI in our current strategic plan, it addresses our desire for having all of our students to be college, career, and life ready. And while on-time graduation is a critical component to us, that last KPI is linked to that first KPI. In our last SBA data, only about 40% of our high school students demonstrated this proficiency in mathematics. And that's about a 55% discrepancy between our graduation rate, which means if we truly want our students to be college, career, and life ready, it means we need to take actions to serve our students better until there is no gap between graduation rate and proficiency in mathematics. And math has changed. I'm sure everyone's heard the term the new math. With the adoption of the Common Core State Standards in Washington State in 2011, we moved away from a strict emphasis on procedural computation and really focused on including problem solving and mathematical reasoning in addition to that computational fluency. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McCarthy, and he's going to share a little bit about our why, the data that drives the actions we take.
Thank you, Dr. Bowden. Good evening, board directors, Dr. Saltzman, and the Everett School community. It's an honor for me to collaborate in sharing this performance and actions report with you tonight. As you know, we were unable to gather state assessment data last spring due to our remote learning situation, but this chart and a series of SBA charts that follow show data ending with the 2018-19 school year, and this data still helps us examine strengths and areas of great need in mathematics across Everett Public Schools. As you can see here, our three-year trend from 2016 to 2019, while we have some improvements in fourth grade, we see a general trend down as students matriculate through our system in mathematics. We're committed to changing this story through specified actions that include increasing rigorous instruction for all students and providing targeted and aligned interventions for students who deserve our very best in extra support. So these next series of slides look at the 5-year trend and show a different story from the elementary to the secondary level. As we look at elementary, we see modest gains over the last 5 years, and we attribute this to system actions, especially coaches and the balanced math model emphasis that has been working to shift learning from rote procedural mathematics to a conceptual understanding since about 2017. Coaches in each building have supported these shifts, teaching and modeling best practices alongside classroom teachers, coordinating interventions, and leading PLC work in analyzing data from the iReady and other classroom-based assessments. Having these leaders in each building has been key to these gains at the elementary level from 2014 to 2019, and these gains persist in the elementary level even despite remote learning, as we'll see on the next slides that compare our iReady data to our SBA in 2018 and 19. But we continue to be reminded that even in a 5-year period of increased achievement, year-to-year growth should be much better than it currently is.
So thank you. On this next slide, what I'd really like to emphasize is share a little bit about some of our iReady trends. While we can see here that there's a correlation from iReady to SBA, in 3rd grade, what I'd like to showcase on this slide is that you'll notice in the red squares, those are fall scores, and you'll notice a significant number of students who are 1 or 2 levels below, grade levels below standard. And if you look at the green square for each correlative piece of data, you'll see that those red and yellow numbers are diminishing. So what you see is from fall to spring, the number of students who are 1 or 2 grade levels below standard diminishes as we progress through the school year. You'll see the same data on grade 4. You'll see that same trend where you see a significant number of students who are performing below standard in the fall. And through the use of the iReady tools, we see a significant amount of growth. In this case, over 30% for our 4th graders. And you'll see the same trend in our 5th grade. So one of the things that you'll notice is that during in-person learning, as well as in remote instruction, iReady has continued to be a really powerful tool to help our teaching staff fill gaps for students, providing just-in-time support for those students at their places of greatest need. As students are utilizing the iReady programs, we're seeing greater gains with achievement on the SBA. The winter the winter window, that's a little challenging. The winter window for iReady actually opens this month. So we can begin to investigate the gains in areas of support over the current school year. Again, our math coaches and our principals are really key in analyzing the data, supporting the teachers in the use of this tool to help us to continue to close gaps at the elementary level. In addition to the support that we're doing through our teachers, coaches, and administrators with iReady, last Wednesday, January 6th, Dr. Matthews and the assessment and research team actually hosted a district iReady parent event. And Wednesday, as we know, nationally was a really challenging day. We had over 500 people register for the event, but we still had 170 people attend. And the session was really supported, helping families to support their students to utilize the iReady learning tools in the remote setting.
So at the middle school level, there's quite a different story than we just told at the elementary level. Annotated here is movement and achievement since the implementation of the illustrative mathematics, or the Open Up curriculum, in its first year, from one resource in 2017-18 to the illustrative mathematics in 2018-19. So clearly this data is flat, especially when looking at the most recent trend as annotated here. With just slightly more than 4 out of 10 of our students in the middle grades meeting standard, we are missing the momentum and opportunity to capitalize on our elementary success and understanding. Knowing that we have a rigorous curriculum, we need to support teachers in developing instructional practices that allow for all students to gain access and build conceptual understanding. Language acquisition strategies, student discourse, and problem-solving strategies are our areas of focus. With math instruction changing significantly from how our teachers learned at the university and how they instructed in a pre-Common Core resource, much of our focus at the middle level has been in building capacity of principals to lead for high quality math instruction with support. We look forward to showing you more nearly live examples of what this instruction looks like just a little bit later in the presentation. So again, this data, not new, shows our high school SBA data where students are now tested in the 10th grade. It used to be the 11th grade. But these scores, like the middle level data, are flat and unacceptable, with just 40% of our students meeting standard. So low performance on the SBA has persisted over time, and it's significantly different from our graduation rate, as Dr. Boughton shared at the outset. In order to effectively serve our students and prepare them for college, career, and life readiness, we're taking this opportunity to focus on shifts in instructional practice through the adoption and implementation of illustrative mathematics at the secondary level, even in remote instruction. Again, as we look back at our system data in all testable grades, we see a significant decline beginning in 5th grade and ending with an unacceptable 6 out of 10 students not meeting standard in mathematics by grade 10. The cumulative effect of students not receiving Common Core standards-based instruction continues to push us to do better for our students urgently and in the now. We recognized the secondary slide several years ago and organized adoptions of rigorous Common Core aligned instructional resources, beginning with middle school in 2018, as you know, and then moving to high school last year, as these grade bands represented significant needs. By increasing teacher content knowledge through professional learning and increasing targeted and powerful intervention aligned to a guaranteed and viable curriculum, we know we can change this trajectory for our students.
So with an increased expectation to teach in new ways, we needed to make significant instructional shifts. So in reviewing the data and seeing that students are still underserved in math, we've identified several practices and their associated beliefs that needed to shift.
So shown here are tools that have resonated for teachers. They're snipped here on the slide. And notable are the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics Unproductive and Productive Beliefs table that identifies shifts needed, as well as the student-facing math norms used across elementary schools connected to the San Francisco Unified School District's distance learning tools. As I'm sharing here, do take some time to reflect for a moment on how similar these artifacts are with your math schooling experience, and even how maybe the productive beliefs and the math norms might have improved your experience as a mathematics learner and student. For example, because the Common Core changed from the way that we wanted students to engage in math, we're moving, again on the left side, from procedural practice to a focus on developing concepts through problem solving, reasoning, and student discourse. Teachers are working to shift away from being great notes generators, telling students each and every step of a problem, to releasing ownership to students so that they themselves can grapple with mathematics, use manipulatives, access resources to identify possible solutions, and share in-process thinking, as well as to gather ideas from peers, just as you and I would do in solving problems in our real life. So what's more is that each of these activities supports language acquisition and engagement for all students at all levels in the same setting, so that more than copying notes and trying to follow all the steps the teacher showed us, this benefits them at greater rates. Again, shifting traditional practices of teaching mathematics takes significant knowledge, will, skill, and support, and we'll discuss these ideas in the slides that follow. So one shift we're making is through our adoption processes. In the past, a team of teachers had focused on the selection of a curricular resource absent pedagogical shifts. And now, as a part of the adoption, we invest significant time, usually 3 of the 8 meetings that we hold, in collaboratively developing best practices with committee members who represent each school, the community, our equity department, and our special services team. This critical change in our adoption process not only supports buy-in during implementation, but it also creates teacher leaders excited and motivated to lead for equity, mathematical understanding, and overall achievement at their school sites. We're also supporting teachers with just-in-time job-embedded professional learning as a primary focus. We offer differentiated professional learning spanning from 2-day summer curriculum implementation trainings to shadow or walkthrough experiences that connect teachers to one another, to their coaches, or to building leaders invested in improving outcomes in mathematics. And we know that often when we shift beliefs to where teachers and leaders know what to do, there's often still a gap called the knowing and doing gap. Bridging this gap of knowing what to do and doing is best taken up through job-embedded professional development, where modeling, practicing, and providing additional support by building coaches and leaders supports those shifts from knowing and being able to realize those shifts with students. So we'll examine the how we do this in one of the next segments coming up. So one shift we saw earlier was moving from the role of a teacher being of one that stands and explains in detail all the steps before allowing a student to grapple with mathematical ideas. The productive role for a math teacher would be to release ownership to students before summarizing key concepts that students have had a chance to explore. So moving from gradual release pedagogy, which is shown here in the slide, to an inquiry-based pedagogy is a shift we desire to make across our school district, including at the elementary level. In the next few slides, we'll look at some of the professional development slides that we're using to help us shift elementary practices in our system. We asked teachers in this example to reflect on the gradual release model of instruction that many have learned in their teacher education programs, and that is also embedded in our pre-Common Core Pearson adopted materials from 2012. Here you see the model for gradual release, where much of the ownership, especially early in the lesson, is the teacher talking while students attempt to retain new information. Late in the lesson series with gradual release, students would typically practice 10 or 15, maybe even 20 problems at a low depth of knowledge level before being moved on to application problems. In this professional learning segment, teachers recognize that Pearson as a curriculum has been written in this way, and it has the need to be heavily supplemented to meet the rigor of the Common Core state standards, as well as what we know about what supports students and their learning. Yet they want to learn more about how to make this shift to inquiry-based modes of learning. So we've taken this opportunity to use the Common Core resource in San Francisco Unified School District's remote learning curriculum to provide professional learning on shifting from gradual release pedagogy to an inquiry-based pedagogy through the Launch, Explore, Summarize instructional strategy that we'll look at here. So again, here you see another slide from a professional development experience where we are supporting teachers using inquiry through the Launch, Explore, Summarize strategy. As you can see, gradual release is almost flipped entirely on its head here, where students are asked to sink their teeth into rich math tasks at the outset in the engaging hook at the launch, where they're asked to explore individually or in groups. Teachers refer to this with their students as opportunities for their brains to sweat. In addition to brain sweating, all entry points for all students, especially those who are served by special populations, are evident in this type of instructional shift, because students access mathematics by stating what they notice and they wonder. They make their own predictions, they try strategies, and they use tools to grapple with mathematics with other learners. So direct instruction from the teacher then comes during the summary, where a skilled teacher is connecting mathematical ideas with students who now have a stake in solving the rich problem that they're investigating. Mathematical discourse, which again supports language acquisition, is facilitated, building students' ability to listen and speak while learning mathematics. Those 21st century skills of collaboration and communication are built as a math as a team sport versus an individual sport with these inquiry-based instructional practices. So all of this represents a huge shift from how we learn mathematics, and this takes coordinated and aligned support and leadership. So here we want to continue to show you how we make these shifts, even in a remote learning environment, by viewing a brief example of a launch, explore, summarize in action, at least the launch portion. So again, this routine not only supports conceptual understanding for each student in our diverse population, but it's also a culturally sustaining pedagogy as it honors familial and cultural ways of thinking and is supportive of language acquisition for all of our students. It's in this brief snapshot of a job-embedded professional learning segment, Principal Young at Emerson Elementary models the shift to inquiry-based instruction with the launch, explore, summarize routine, while members of her staff and 2 other schools take a learning stance in observing. Our remote setting has allowed us this opportunity to open our classrooms up at greater and greater rates. So culturally responsive pedagogy is also embedded, where Principal Young is elevating many students' native language and positioning a person of color as the main character in this math problem. Principal Young is also practicing the noticing wondering protocol evident in our elementary San Francisco Unified School District distance learning tools, which allow every student an opportunity to engage with low risk from the outset of each launch, explore, summarize routine. So let's watch this.
Way. What's the 3-part way? Launch, explore, summarize. That's a great question. Oh, okay. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I introduce Miss Young, your principal, to do the first part of our math lesson today, are the specific math norms that we're going to be working on today here. Talk about each other's thinking. So being able to not just talk about how I think, but how everybody else thinks too, and be able to talk to each other. And this last one, use multiple strategies and multiple representations. Great, thank you. Good morning. Buenos días, niños. ¿Están listos para empezar? Are you ready to begin the launch part of our matemáticas, of our math today? Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and get started with launching a great math activity. Alicia Woods. Here's a quote. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. Kalisha says, I served by putting together food boxes that go to senior citizens. Each box equals some number of meals, and each pallet holds some number of boxes. So look that over, and I'm going to ask you, what do you notice? That's all we're doing is, what do you notice? Just think for a minute. What do you notice about this problem?
Mike, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Boughton.
You bet.
So following these professional development events, principals and coaches work to co-teach, observe, and support teachers in practicing these new routines that they've learned. Teaching expertise is shared and gained in new and veteran teachers alike through the process of collaborative design and implementation. We'll have a reflection from one of these events in just a few minutes.
What's the 3-part way? Launch, explore, summarize. That's a
Okay, so here we'll see what teachers at the elementary grades see as a support for instruction while they're teaching with our distance learning resource. The San Francisco tools not only follow what we know is powerful for student learning with inquiry-based instruction, but the material is also created to be used in a remote setting. There is support for teachers to know what should be implemented in synchronous learning, as well as suggestions for asynchronous work and student interaction opportunities that are integrated with our technology platforms. So again, as you can see here, what faces our teachers is suggestions for synchronous and asynchronous learning, and the idea that students have a student-facing document that allows them to collaborate and share their thinking. So this is built, the summarized portion in this particular lesson is built from students taking pictures of their own thinking and adding it to a slide deck that the teacher views to prepare for the facilitation of a discussion around the key ideas that will guide students to understanding the standard aligned learning target. On this slide, there's a series of Seesaw submissions that are from our kindergartners. That's right, our kindergartners are showcasing student engagement on an end of unit milestone task or a unit assessment. Our youngest learners are spinning spinners virtually and tracking data using digital inking, that they're reading numbers aloud and recording those for their teachers to listen to and respond. They're interacting in ways that truly show the amazing learning is possible through technology integration despite our distance. Teachers' powerful use of these tools will expand in-person instruction to provide differentiated support when we do return to schools. So again, Seesaw and these remote learning activities allow teachers to assess, advance, and check on student learning, as well as adjust instruction and provide targeted feedback. All these things are so powerful to see in action. So in addition to supporting teachers, we're also collaborating, as I said earlier, with instructional leaders to help them support meaningful and relevant instruction in our schools. Here, our middle school principals, armed with IR action plan similarities, are collaborating to plan for our first all-district, all-middle school math teachers professional development session in several years in this remote setting. Building our leaders' capacity to lead for the shift necessary, increasing outcomes in math is our highest priority here at the middle school level. Here's an example of the fruit of that principal leadership collaboration. It's a working document in Jamboard where all middle school math teachers and many special educators are shown here using that digital tool Jamboard to digitally ink or vote up what has been a success so far this year and what is needed for support. Notable here is what teachers said about Desmos and training around all of our other digital tools. They also felt that this was a great success in engaging students, the work with Desmos, and they expressed a desire for additional support, as you see with all the circles and arrows to the right, related to access and permissions in the use of our new student assessment tool, Performance Matters. They're excited about the program's use and would like to see my team make additional adjustments to the Performance Matters assessment that we've created for each unit. So as teachers identified in the previous slide, the digital tool success with Desmos, we'll see shortly teachers, students, and families also have the entire illustrative mathematics textbook completely integrated in our Canvas learning management system with links to other digital tools like Khan Academy for illustrative mathematics and others. This shows the online assignments, the quick quizzes and discussion boards that have supported engagement with our standards aligned material during remote instruction. And as shared by both middle and high school teachers, and as seen during walkthroughs for instructional reviews, Desmos is a powerful engagement tool that's aligned to our illustrative mathematics curriculum. It's also aligned to those shifts that we discussed earlier. So teachers are releasing ownership for learning to students and becoming facilitators of discussions using this powerful tool. In a moment, we'll see Trisha Percival at Cascade High School, who is leading her high school students in the launch, or what illustrative mathematics calls the invitation to the math from the IM curriculum. Ms. Percival is part of a professional development session similar to the one shown at Emerson, where all geometry teachers at Cascade are practicing routines for increasing language acquisition and building conceptual understanding through mathematical discourse routines. Let's watch.
I like to organize mine, so you can put all your stuff up here. I'll give you like another minute. Can you tell me 2 cards you would match in here?
Sorry, my mute button fingered. I would do image 3
and scale factor of 1. You're a smart cookie. Have I ever told you that? Because that's what I would. Why? It was the easiest one because it didn't change. So that means it was just like the same, like scale factor of 1. Okay, thank you.
I think that image 1 should belong to a scale factor of 3/2.
3 halves? Why would you do that? It seems logical.
Yeah.
Why does it seem logical? What about the 3 halves makes it seem logical?
Because probably 12 is, so 6 plus 6 is 12, but 6 times 3 equals 18 in like 3 seconds.
Okay, so what is, you said 1.5. Is that less than a whole?
So Ms. Percival did a great job in using questioning strategies there to advance learning. And key to Desmos is that it shows exactly what each student in her class is doing in real time as they progress through the illustrative math standards aligned lessons. As we saw, Desmos allows each teacher to give direct feedback individually and collectively as students explore. And it also allows teachers to monitor and adjust instruction on the fly. Following this clip, Kathy Trosvig, our secondary math facilitator, wraps up this job-embedded professional development session with a summary connecting mathematical ideas that the Cascade PLC team saw in Desmos submitted student work and analyzed during synchronous learning time. Dr. Boughton?
Thanks, Mr. McCarthy. You know, I think one of the biggest challenges that we see in math in a virtual environment is thinking about how often we rely on that spot real-time feedback for students of how are they doing, how are they performing. And you've seen Mr. McCarthy present some of the tools that we've used in distance learning. But I also want to emphasize that our teachers have gotten really, really creative at helping to utilize technology as a tool to help us meet the needs of students. So for example, I had the great honor of being able to go pop out and do some classroom walks last week at Jackson High School. And I wanted to share with you just some creative things that we've seen teachers doing to help continue to innovate around collaboration. And this is one of the examples I'd love to share, which is a creative collaboration that our teachers are coming up to, and hats off to that algebra team at Jackson. And part of good math instruction is really that one-to-one support that teachers can offer when kids get stuck, right? So here, this team has done an amazing job of actually narrating videos of their common assignments so students can watch that teacher unpack and model the solution online when they can access it, and they can access this at any time. So I'm not gonna, for sake of time, I'm not gonna show the video, but she's doing a great job of just outlining, hey, this is how you solve the problem, and really helping students to be able to do that visual unpacking in a way that works for them. On this next slide, you can actually see that collaboration and small group work in distance learning is still really alive. A lot of times we think, oh, the only way to solve this is in a breakout session and have kids kind of look at Zoom screens. But one of the things that this teacher is using is the OneNote in her breakout rooms to allow students to share and collaborate on these problems. So it increases students' discourse and encourages students to share their thinking with one another. And she has a code on this. So if students are in breakout rooms working on a shared document, if they use a virtual green sticky in the corner, it means that they understand and don't need support. If the sticky note is pink, it means that they could use some assistance, and the teacher knows that she can intervene with that group first to help them solve their problem.
All right, so along with powerful learning routines in our remote setting and our amazing teachers, we continue to support them, our teachers, as they have identified in middle school, that meeting Jamboard that we saw, around supports for assessing and advancing student learning. Our team has created end of unit assessments, pre-diagnostic assessments, and milestone task assessments, or those end of unit assessments at the end of elementary units, in multiple platforms for ease of use and ease of assessment despite our remote learning environment. We are excited to continue this work for the remainder of the year as we springboard into 2021 with some bonus knowledge.
So in summary, from the instructional reviews that we've participated in, we've identified that most of the needs identified in those IRs has been increasing conceptual understanding and rigorous mathematics instruction across our system. We've talked about the how in this presentation, and we're building leadership capacity, supporting teachers in making those shifts to standards aligned practices and the new technology tools. We're also using formative assessment tools to hold ourselves accountable to the increased achievement we know our students deserve.
So this brings us to our reflection, and how do we understand and know if we're moving in the right direction? We'd like to share some information and ideas from an amazing teacher. In this clip, Miss Elvira Perez reflects after a job-embedded professional development session that was co-facilitated by her principal and coach, which was aimed at supporting shifts that we discussed at the outset to advance mathematics learning and achievement for all of our students. So listening in on this reflection is her leadership team, as well as another school preparing to begin their own job-embedded professional development cycle. And this work, as you'll see and hear, is contagious.
I think because as a teacher, opening up our classroom to an audience like that is very unnerving. And I think at the same time, though, making ourselves vulnerable will only help us to grow. And I think once we can overcome that little hurdle and see that others have done it and learn from their experiences, I think it would help teachers to maybe want to participate a little bit more. I know for me, I wanted to open up my classroom and just get an outsider's perspective and say, okay, you know, we're seeing some math thinking, or maybe we can do this to help shift math thinking, or I was definitely taking it as just as a clinic, like we're doing rotations, and this is you know, everyone's doing rotations right now, and it's my turn. You're going to my medical bed, and I'm trying to diagnose my students, and you're.
So with all the learning our system has been doing and assessing student knowledge through digital platforms, through collaborating in job-embedded professional learning sessions, and through shifting beliefs about mathematics, we're more ready than ever before to catalyze change in mathematics. Our ability to learn while operating, even during remote learning, is evident of the dedication of many incredible teachers across our P12 system. We look forward to continuing to broaden the purpose of mathematics for each and every student. It's so much more than calculating and number crunching. We're also so excited to continue conversations about equitable instruction and structures so that all students can see that they deserve our very best. And we're committed to moving from knowing about equitable math instruction to doing equitable math instruction so that all of our students have success and are prepared for college, career, and life. In looking forward and support of our continuing efforts to catalyze change, this is what you'll be hearing a little bit more about in April with our elementary adoption and beginning implementation in 2022.
Thank you. And we know that we have work to do in math to better serve our students and equip them for success. And this evening, we've had an opportunity to share our why, that urgency around improving math instruction for our students, what we've identified as the work we're doing, and then the how we're implementing those actions in a virtual instructional setting. So thank you for allowing us to share with you tonight how we're engaging in the right work to help each and every one of our Everett Public School students engage in meaningful mathematical thinking so they can experience that success throughout our thinking. We've left some time for some questions or comments from board directors. So Mike, if you will stop screen sharing, we can turn it back over to President Mason.
Thank you. Thank you both for a very detailed informational presentation, a lot to absorb. And I appreciate the examples, the video examples to help us better understand. Directors, do you have questions? Director Mitchell?
Yeah, this is very, very helpful. And I do like hearing that for so many years, as we've watched our math scores either decline or be stagnant, that we're finally showcasing some significant changes where we have been doing lots of changes, but that just to see that you know, stretch is so important. And I definitely see some stretch here. One question I have, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but and it could be more about age than anything else. But at my daughter's college last fall, in her calculus class, it was more, she was really off put a little bit because it was more of a writing class than a math class. And her final was a written final, but it was a written final in this terms of explain your calculations. And so she had to use 1,500 words or something like that to explain, like, say, 3 different calculations. So it wasn't just showing the math, it was really that deep understanding of the math. Is that age because she was 18, or is that a different form of teaching math and demonstrating learning that could be done at any age?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Dr. Boughton. So the math standards are broken up into 2 categories. There's the content standards, which cover all the things related to, what you and I learned in school. Then the Common Core breaks out the math practice standards. And what you're speaking to right now is for students to make arguments and justify their thinking with reasoning is a math practice standard. It's math practice standard 3, and it's embedded right now through the Common Core from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. But it wasn't there until 2014. It hasn't been a focus, but many schools in our system are using things like the claim, evidence, and reasoning protocol to make a claim about their mathematics, to provide evidence and numbers and data, and then to justify their thinking with reasoning. So we're working to close that gap because we want students to be able to communicate their thinking, make arguments, as you're suggesting.
Yeah, because one thing she did notice was that, as she's doing her computations, she's like, well, I got it, but I don't understand how I got it. And I think the writing helped her see, and also communicating back with her instructor. How did I get this? And so I think that teacher support, I love that idea of the pink and the green. What team is right on track? What team do I need to intervene on? I'm pretty familiar with OneNote, but if it is more urgent and they're in a small group, how do they reach out to their teacher in a more urgent way than in that passive changing a color?
They'll drop back out of the breakout room and go back to or they'll drop it in the chat. They'll communicate that way with the teacher. And as Mike was saying, you'll see some of those, some of that justification and reasoning in even some of those kindergarten seesaw videos where a student records, they say, here's my answer, and here's why I think it's my answer. So we're retraining our system in really helping students not just find an answer, but to talk about their thinking with their peers as well as their teachers. So it's not just about answer validation, it's about tell me more, interactive student discourse, and we can capture that on some of the digital tools that we're using right now in remote learning.
Well, that's what I think is so outstanding. The learnings we can do virtually that we can take back into the classroom.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Director Nichols.
Thank you for that presentation, and we do have a long way to go. So understanding that the overall goal is to have our proficiency rates meet our graduation rates, have we come up with a short-term goal? So over the next year or two, do we have a goal of improvement of 3%, 5%, 4%, whatever it may be? Can you tell us a little bit about that, what we plan to do to get there?
Yeah, I absolutely. We do have goals set specifically in increasing student achievement. We want to try and make sure that we have small, incremental, sustainable steps of growth. So a 3% target for all schools is one of the things we have. In 5 years, that's a 15% gain, which sometimes I think we get caught up in we need to close that gap as fast as we possibly could. And there's definitely urgency behind that. But one of the things that we know is if we want to have sustainable achievement, we need to ensure that students have the skills that they need to be successful in progressive years. So making those smaller goals of 3% for each grade level so that we can build on those successes so that long-term we can have the sustainability with that.
Right. I mean, I don't expect any of this to be a panacea and like solve all of our problems overnight. I just want to make sure that we're focusing on those measurable, attainable goals over the long haul to get us there. So great, thank you.
I have a question around, I looked at this presentation earlier today, and Like Director Mitchell, it was exciting to see the shift and the change in thinking and instructional practices. And although I always get so discouraged looking at the numbers. I mean, they're really not great. and it's a national problem. It's a district problem. I don't understand how our students can start out at 70% proficiency in math and 7 years later end up at 40%. Like where in the system is the fallout? I don't really, I understand that there's ways we can improve instructional strategies and get better at teaching and all of that, but can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, I can address that. And I don't know if Mr. McCarthy wants to jump in as well. But one of the things that we have looked at through the instructional review process are things along the lines of, do we have clarity of learning instructional targets, as well as what is the time on task in mathematics? And that's one that is not necessarily consistent through our system, and an area that we're continuing to work on to develop. So how much time are students actually engaged in mathematics on a daily basis? And then I think that there actually is some research around the growing complexity of the mathematics as you progress on through the system. And maybe Mike can speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, thank you, Director Mason, for the question. There is definitely a growing conceptual understanding that is needed by teachers as we matriculate through the system. And the cumulative effect, one of the things we mentioned in the presentation, the cumulative effect of a Common Core curriculum, when we look at that line that is going downward, we're not seeing, it's not the same student that's marching downward, but we have students in grades K through 5 that have experienced Common Core mathematics for the last 5 to 6 years. And we have students after that that are taking a test that is aligned to Common Core standards, but they haven't experienced Common Core math in entirety except for the last 3 or 4 years with our curriculum and with the standards that are presented. So it's about shifting both teacher practice and also getting those students to have success in the mathematics that they're experiencing, which is aligned to the Common Core. And the adoptions that you have all supported in making these shifts have been powerful in that work. We also are investigating what is the difference between ELA and mathematics? What happens that's different for a student in mathematics than ELA as they matriculate through our system? So continuing these conversations with a focus on equity is important to me and my team and our district.
Thank you both for that explanation. That's very helpful, because I noticed also science scores are not trending in the right direction. And I'm sure that's highly correlated to some of our math scores. And then, as I'm listening to the San Francisco Unified School District curriculum that we are now using and shifting into, I guess my question is, we're asking teachers now to learn and grab this and take hold of it and use it in their virtual classrooms. And we're also doing adoptions at the same time. And I mean, I guess I'm wondering how they're integrated, and are we asking teachers to learn sort of 2 adoptions almost, more or less? Because that seems a little bit overwhelming in terms of actually improving instructional practices when you're doing so much at once.
So the San Francisco Unified materials are for the elementary level at this time, because grades 6 through 12 are utilizing the illustrative mathematics that has already been adopted, and they've done some implementation work. The implementation of SFUSD is specifically in this remote environment because our Pearson materials were not supported digitally. And so it is learning something new. And so a lot of the professional development that we've focused on has not been about use of materials, rather use of the instructional strategies like Launch, Explore, Summarize, which are deeply embedded in all of the materials that we are planning on adopting. So that is a math practice that we want our students to be engaging in, because it helps them to develop that communicating their reasoning and justification for their answers that is important in the Common Core. So that's been a true emphasis of the work that we've done. And Mike, I don't know if you want to speak any more to SFUSD use.
Yeah, so as a part of the adoption process, San Francisco Unified School District curriculum is one of the 6 materials that we're actually looking at as well. It's not just a school district curriculum, but it's going through the adoption process. The team is just at the early stages. It is a research-based curriculum that has been vetted by many others in its 5th year of development. But as Dr. Bowden shared, it's a completely separate process. So teachers that are in K-5, they're not adopting and trying to implement at the same time. They're using our curriculum maps that point to the digital tools. We hope that are, and we're hearing a lot of feedback that they're a lot more supportive of distance learning than our Pearson text. They can use the Pearson topics. That's for them to use, but these make it much more easier for students to collaborate and teachers to understand what students are doing. But those are separate processes, the implementation and the adoption.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the focus around this and, better understanding sort of the path forward, as it were, because, we talk a lot about percentages, 40% this, that. And, when we look at high school graduation, I like to think, we have 300 graduates at Everett, 4 at Cascade, 5 at Jackson, just to make big round numbers. That's like 720 students that are hitting graduation with probably not a real robust math background. And so to me, when I look at those numbers, it's staggering. And I just look forward to the work that the two of you are doing. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we are committed and we are working really hard. We are not going to accept declines. I commend our teaching staff and our leaders who are working so hard in this remote environment, which I feel like we picked the hardest year for teaching ever.
Right. I know.
They are just doing an amazing job because they won't tolerate not supporting and serving our students. They want to move our students forward and they're not giving up. So, we're going to continue the good work at the district level, but it's our teachers and our leaders who are at the front who are just doing the good work that is absolutely going to serve our students. So,
and I always like to think, there's definitely going to be some great things coming out of this remote learning environment that we're going to take back into the classroom or leave out of the classroom remotely. That's going to be extremely helpful, I think, both for our teachers and our students going forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Shelley and Mike, may I make a comment? Shelley and Mike, you are doing awesome work. You're doing a lot of work that, was needed some time ago. I look at also, I'm going to have to ditto what has been said by others. To go from seeing grade 3 at 68% at that level of meeting standard to then go down to 42% for high school is unheard of. We should not be looking at that because you have to remember, as you mentioned, Mike, 6 out of 10 kids are not getting it. We have to start remembering, though, that each student learns differently. And some of them may not get that hook. Some of them won't, their brain will sweat through the entire effort. And so we have to look at things a lot differently. And I really wish, I've said this in the past, I wish we can divorce ourselves from comparing ourselves with the state. When the state is not meeting but 46%, we should never compare ourselves with the state. We should always be looking at how we can get to 100%. And we need to make sure that all students are getting it.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of those 6 out of 10 that aren't getting it, really never get it with the procedures, those things that we've learned, the techniques we've learned, because their brain just may not function that way. Every kid learns things differently, and we've got to be able to meet that difference so that we can make them successful. So even though we're, and I really like what you're saying. I really like the hard work our in professional development our teachers are doing. But if we're looking to bring that 45% meeting standard up to 96% on-time graduation rate at the same level, we've got to make sure that we're meeting the needs of every student and how they understand math. So sometimes we've got to do things differently. One size does not always fit. And we've got to make sure that no child is left out of it. And then what I would like to see, if we stop comparing ourselves with the state and we start looking too at other groups and how each of our groups that we have looked at in the past, how are they doing? What additional supports then do they need? What other districts within our area, within our country, within the state, whatever, is doing differently so that it can address their particular needs and their learning style? Because when you start looking at middle school at 42%, how can we say that we're preparing our kids for upper level math, more rigorous math in the high school, if our middle school kids aren't there yet? We've got to make sure we support that progression up in the high school level, and then also preparing our high school students so that when they go to college calculus or college math, they aren't at a disadvantage. What can we do to meet that need? And we've got to look at all kinds. Nothing is off the table. Look at different types of ways in which we reach our students so that each one is successful. So thank you for the hard work you're doing. I really would like to continue to see this more frequently than once a year so that we can see how are we doing. One concern I have is that when we switch to different types of methods and we don't succeed at one before we switch to another, we're no better than where we were at the beginning. So we have to stick with one particular method and show some data that we can say this is working or this is not working before we switch to something else. And how many students is this working for that student? And where do we have to go to reach the other students that it's not working for? We can't ever say ever again, 6 out of the 10 students aren't meeting standards. That's just not, I don't think it's realistic today. We don't want to be there anymore.
That's right. Okay, I'm going to let student representatives or Director Berg speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in just because Director Listens kind of summed it up really well. And I think the frustration level, thank you for for your emotion there, because that's kind of where I was going. But I think for me, the frustration is that for so long, our district has hung its hat on that graduation rate, being very aware that there was this huge disconnect. And to say 40% are proficient is just, it left me speechless when I first came to the district. It was like, that can't be the case. And there was a previous school board member, I think she made a comment of the fact of, can we just get kids over the finish line that can count change, right? I mean, think about how basic that is, that we're graduating students with our degree and our amazing graduation rate who can't count change if all of a sudden the power goes out at their place of employment. So as much as I would love to echo Director Listens's, what are we doing when they get to college calculus? Let's be really honest, they're not going to college calculus. And so I think that's part of the frustration, is that we have kind of this, we have this perception of where and what our students are doing that the data says otherwise. And so I really implore you, I've said this before, please look at the 8-year data where our students are. And if you look at that 8-year data, it doesn't coincide with what we're telling parents at parent teacher night at Jackson and Everett and Cascade. We know good and well where our students are going, and they're going to sometimes dead end places because they haven't been adequately prepared by our system. And quite frankly, with some of the AP presentations that I've sat through as a parent, it's just a bill of goods that you've been sold. So they've struggled through 4 or 5 AP classes, only to 8 years out not have completed a college degree. So it's all connected. But the one thing I did want to ask specifically is, we're looking at that 3rd grade data. And it's a huge drop off, right, from that 3rd and 5th grade. Are we taking into account high cap? Because that's another problem point that I've pointed out that our high cap kids are not truly high cap, right? They are 2 years ahead because they go to Kumon and other things, right? Which is fabulous. I'm not knocking that as a parent or as a choice, but again, we're calling kiddos highly capable, that there is something innate in them that is actually a special ed designation, when we all know they are literally going 2 miles away to Kumon to get that designation. And so I'm wondering, not all of them, but some of them are. Absolutely. I've sat through some of these, but some of them are. And I would say the majority that I've run into are doing that and knowing that that's how they can get their kids in there to test. So are we looking at that in the data?
So one of the things that I think this really brings up a great concept, because one of the things that we are looking at when we think about access and equity for all students within our system is that we need to provide students with equitable outcomes embedded within those math classes. Mm-hmm. So when we utilize structures and instructional practices that encourage student dialogue and discourse from the very earliest that they enter our system, we are building their mathematical thinking to help them to be more focused on what's going to be important long-term for their success in mathematics according to the Common Core state standards. So we're moving, as we've said, we're moving away from this shift on computational fluency. And often when we do highly capable testing, we're looking for other qualities, not just speed and accuracy, but also do they have the conceptual thinking to be able to process, engage in student discourse. But it starts with providing our students equitable outcomes at the onset. So, and I wouldn't even say just starting at kindergarten. Ann Arnold, the early learning director, has done an amazing job at helping to facilitate additional supports in early numeracy skills in our PK programs. So in our transitional kindergarten programs as well. So it starts with really solid instructional practices and giving kids an even playing field, because some of our kids come to us with a deficit, but we can, with good instruction, good instructional practices, and a viable and guaranteed curricula, we can actually combat some of those deficits to provide equity and access and equitable outcomes for all of our students.
Okay, and thank you for that answer. But something just occurred to me. So have we ever done a survey of our high cap students to see if how many are receiving outside instructional support?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know that we've done a survey to see what kinds of outside support students are receiving in that program.
Okay, I would just like to stick a pin in that, because I'd be very curious to see in those programs if the anecdotal data from the teachers and the parents match up with the reality of what it seems to be in some of those programs.
Yes.
But that also could drive the deficit later on. Once you remove that instructional support, then it becomes harder to stay at pace and be proficient. And then just lastly, just using words like not proficient and low scoring and things like that, that kind of digs into a kid. And so I'm just not sure how we're using that with our kiddos, and if we can maybe be super careful, because and I've seen it even in the media, right, that Everett graduates X amount and they aren't proficient in math, and imagine being a part of that graduation class and seeing that headline. So just something to be aware of, because it does kind of, it hurts. It kind of hurts my feelings. So thanks.
We work hard at trying to promote student first language. So things like emerging bilingual rather than English learners. So really trying to focus our language. And that's a practice that we're all engaged in. In education, it's easy to default to what we always say, but it is about shifting our language to serve students first.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to step in and the wonderful thing about the directors is we all are parents, and we have all been parents, either our current or about to be, or former parents of Everett Public School students. And we all have different experiences to bring to the table, which I think makes our discussions robust. But I caution you in biasing your thoughts too much on our school system. So my kids weren't highly capable. I don't know a single other student in either of their classes that went to Kumon. It was non-existent in the North End. So South End might be a little bit different. And my kids did go on to, they were prepared and ready to go into college calculus. So just remember, there's a lot of experiences and a lot of different paths that our students take. And sometimes your bubble in your world as a parent, I think influences your vision of the district. And sometimes it might be a little bit different depending on where you are, where your kids go to school. So before we leave the topic, I do want to give our student representatives an opportunity to ask questions or share thoughts.
I had a few things I wanted to say about, I know this is kind of, it might seem kind of blunt, but I want to say something about the idea of like engagement in standardized testing, just from a student perspective. When you're in elementary school and you're told this is a super important test, this test is like probably the most important one you'll take all year, and you're just put into a desk and you do your best on that test because you're told it's important. When you start to get into middle and high school, you realize that this is not something that will have an influence on your grade or the classes that you're put into once you're able to choose your classes for yourself and you're able to check your grades online all the time and see exactly what's going on. So I just want to say, like, have there been comparisons between math and English scores, and have there been comparisons between math and science scores and things like that? Because like, can we look at this? Obviously, I really, really admire and enjoy the fact that we're changing our math curriculums and our math teaching styles, because I think those 21st century skills are really important, regardless of what the test scores would be. But one thing I want to say is, like, the changes in scores might not be completely attributed to a lack of proficiency in math. It might just be a lack of engagement in standardized testing. So if we have like any other metrics on how to measure math proficiency, or if we can compare those to the ELA scores, I think that that could maybe give a little bit bigger picture to see if there's like different factors contributing to it.
Tara, I really appreciate your student perspective. It's powerful to hear you speak both in the opening comments and hear your question. I think that, you know, one of the tools that we have is Performance Matters, and you may or may not have seen that yet, but the idea that our assessments are connected to the learning that's actually taking place in the units that you're studying is a powerful thing that we want to continue to get better at as we learn, as teachers learn that product. Because that is connected to a grade, right? So we could ferret out the idea, is this engagement in the assessment or is this truly learning? So we're excited at the high school level to continue with Performance Matters, because we'll be able to see that data for sure. I appreciate your voice again in the space.
Thank you.
I might make a comment. I know Amina, she might be coming in to comment, but that gives me an idea what Tara just brought up. What about placing students, or at least your highly capable or your AP students, in the same committee that selects different type of adoptions, math adoptions, where you can receive, especially your very capable students, you could receive a student perspective on, wait a minute, this may not be the way in which we study. This is the way we study. This seems like something I could easily do. And this is how I perceive it, or my perceptions on how it's coming across to me.
Yeah, Director Slana, I really appreciate that question too. It's part of our process. It's great when we go out and field test the three typically final resources. We have students evaluate what resource brings out for them, what was challenging, what was engaging, all kinds of questions related to that board policy adoption process that gives us direct feedback with a student voice. And it was particularly insightful when we looked at the illustrative mathematics adoption last year. Students were saying, hey, I felt both engaged and challenged with this resource. I felt like I had to speak with my peers in order to grapple with the mathematics. It wasn't just the teacher telling me what to do. So those were definitely taken into consideration.
Thank you.
Representative Hussein, do you want to say anything, or should we move on?
Just a thank you for the presentation. And in my algebra class, we were actually talking about in prior years, we were looking at some of your work and like the pieces of like the booklet and things like that, just as an example for Miss Austin's class. And I could say that it's way more hands-on, and it's way more discussion type stuff than we do now in the textbooks. So it's very interesting to see that play out. So thank you.
Great, thank you for that feedback.
Thank you. Okay, I think this has been a pretty robust conversation and certainly a very robust presentation. So I'd like to thank both Dr. Boughton and Mr. McCarthy again for your time and your question Q&A. I know this can be a little bit tough when we're looking at scores like this. So your dedication and time to improve this.
Thank you.
With that, we are going to move to section 12.0, which is our information and discussion section. And tonight we are going to start with first quarter financial update. And I believe Ms. Floyd is going to be presenting.
Director Mason, if I could just make a few introductory comments, or President Mason. I think in light of the functionality of this is somewhat operational, I just wanted to provide a few updates from our November meeting as a preface, and ahead of our February 9th budget development update, which will be more on our projections and what we're doing with enrollment, et cetera. And in general, if you think back to November when we spoke and the projections are made in early November, there's a lot of more favorable information that has come before us since then. And, you know, just to name a few, I think we all know that just before the meeting, the revenue forecast for the state had improved to 3.3 billion as a deficit. And that sounds scary, but it was 8.4. We know that some of the caseloads that, just like we're experiencing beyond what we had anticipated, a greater level of savings as a result of being in remote learning. But I think when you add to that the election outcomes at the federal level, which is supporting, of course, the new second round of the elementary secondary schools emergency relief, known as ESSER 2, it's available and coming to us. But beyond that, we had some three rocks of legislative priorities, and I think all of us that attended that meeting, and it was well attended, felt that our local legislators in the 1st, 21st, 38th, and 44th were supportive of that. But beyond that, we were hoping for early action, and I was pleased at City Council, as I may have mentioned, that the lobbyists for the city, who competes for the same dollars we're funded with, had more or less affirmed, and I'm sure Representative Berg would say, there are conversations that will happen early about these. And we're pleased to see that there is a bill or a couple of bills that are going to be looking at transportation and looking at enrollment loss. We also know that the vaccines seem to be available without doubt, and they seem to be accelerating in terms of their distribution. And we have now 3 months of financial and the ability to take a peek at that fourth month to see that the culture in our organization has become conservative and people are working together to reduce costs this year, knowing that the more we save this year, the less we have to make in terms of reductions next year. And finally, you know, under Dr. Saltzman's mantra and in honoring that respect, no layoffs, no furloughs for next year. The cabinet and the administrative team has looked at what we're doing down the road and identified up to about another 3.5 million worth of savings. So as a result of all this, we're excited to tell you that that 7.4% ending fund balance this year projection will be up to 10.2%. I'll make one closing comment for questions on ESSER 2. ESSER 2 is much more significant than ESSER 1. It's still limited to the same spending requirements with some additional latitudes that I'll put together for you in a publication to you as board of directors. But for Everett, it's about 10 million. And that is certainly a significant number. And what we want to avoid is what may have happened back in 2009, and that's the supplanting. It's how does that play in with, for example, how does that play in with this bill on the table for enrollment? And the Asb funding is really prescriptive, and the legislature also needs to approve that use. So it's not a left and right switch, and it's also differentially allocated based upon title programs. So you have a district like Issaquah that might get 4 million, Federal Way is going to get 30, and Everett's here. So there's a lot of moving parts, but the optimism that these resources are available to us and the economy seems to be more optimistic. We're just pleased to present this to you tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ruth.
Good evening, everyone. I will go through the first quarter financial update fairly quickly. Thanks, Jeff, for that intro. I appreciate the opportunity to summarize our first quarter district operations as part of our quarterly financial review. The consent agenda included a companion monthly financial report for November, and that is what this information is based on. And I'll include an overview of 5 funds, and with general fund having a little bit more detail. So for general fund, our student enrollment, as you know, is down quite a bit. We were at about 800 low in October. Annual average though, FTE is what we're funded on, and that looks to be under about 745 FTE. And although that is lower than headcount, it's due to a higher running start, and but running start is funded at a lower rate, and the majority of those funds flows through to the colleges. And projected revenues and transfers, we expect to be about $330 million. As usual, October and April will be our high points due to local levy collections. These projections include 46.6 million in levy collections. They also include many other assumptions, including significant legislative support of enrollment and transportation, as Jeff mentioned, as well as levy revenue collections higher than budget. We had backed off on those assumptions in the budget just to be a bit conservative, and so we've increased those for this projection here. Keep in mind, although the trend looks like we're on track with prior years, we receive apportionment September through December based on budget. And so it'll be January before that enrollment dip catches up. And then in February is when the catch up for lower transportation dollars will occur. And you'll see that reflected in, partially reflected in the second quarter financial update in a couple of months. Projected expenditures are about $333 million, well within our board authorized appropriations. They also include many assumptions, including expenditure decreases identified by cabinet, the 3.5 million that Jeff mentioned before, expenditure increases for student return and athletics as we move into second and third quarter, and as well as a reduced unemployment payment. As you may recall, we had a $1.3 million payment we needed to make in the fall, and the expectation was that we would have another 1.3 million at the end of this month. And the unemployment cooperative hasn't given us those final numbers yet, but we are hopeful that it will be less than 1.3 million for the second payment. General fund projected ending fund balance is 34 million, which translates to 10.2% of projected August expenditure balance, and the target of 5%, it does exceed that. It reflects first of 3-year salary regionalization phase down. That's 2% per year this year, and then for 2 more years. It is increased for more favorable assumptions discussed prior, and the change in assumptions any change in assumptions can swing the fund balance. So as we move forward and we have more information, we'll see these the projections altered based on that. Other funds, capital projects is on track with the trend for the year. We receive capital levy again in October and November, so that's why the revenues increase in those months. And board authorized appropriations were for $53 million, but they're part of a multi-year project plan. And as projects conclude, monthly expenditures will decrease, and August consistently will increase due to accruals from summer work. November ending fund balance in capital projects was $41.9 million, and that includes $3 million in levy transfers to general fund. And for debt service, November ending fund balance was $57.9 million, enough for our December 1 principal and interest payment. And the August 2019 increase reflects the bond sale, the final bond sale we had from 2016. Associated Student Body Fund, November ending fund balance was $1.4 million. Fall is generally the high point throughout the year, as you can see from prior years, but the balance is more unpredictable this year due to decreased activities related to remote learning. Yearbooks and small numbers of ASB cards are still being sold, and we also have some refunds still to come for canceled activities as activities were canceled. And Transportation Vehicle Fund, we have $316 million. We have on order 4 buses, and we expect those to arrive in January. State depreciation also comes into the district every August. So we will have that moving into 21-22. That is all I have for you. I am happy to answer questions.
I ask you to go ahead and take your presentation down? Thank you. I have one quick question. I'm just more out of curiosity with the ASB funds. Are you seeing less fundraising and less expenditures almost equally across the board, or is sort of one outpacing the other?
So far, it's about offsetting each other. I plan to talk, there's an opportunity for me to talk with some of the ASB principals and office managers, the treasurers, and I'm just going to see find out what they're seeing, just to make sure that they understand that since their fundraising is down, they really need to hold down their expenditures as well. But so far, I'm seeing that it's about equal. So the fund balance is holding its own right now.
Right. I was sort of giggling because for years we've been encouraging them to reduce the balance that they carry forward every year. And apparently the pandemic, so another bright spot.
Silver lining.
Yes. Directors or student representatives, does anyone have questions for Ruth or comments? Director Lassane?
Questions. My first question has to do with the capital project fund. You mentioned that the November fund balance was 41 million and change. Well, it's not a lot, it's a lot of change, but it included a lot of change, 41 million plus. But it included 3.5 million or 3.05 million levy transfer to the general fund. Can you explain what that was for?
Yes, so we have a 6-year capital levy where funds are available for technology and other costs. But when we pay for things such as software and items that would normally be paid for out of the general fund, we have to transfer those funds from capital projects levy into the general fund so that we can spend them out of the general fund. So that's what that is.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to verify that was what I was thinking. And then on when you start looking at ASB funding, I know this was so far in advance, or where we're at right now is so far in advance for any kind of student planning on field trips, but there weren't any field trips that they planned this far in advance for that they have to then be canceling and recouping funds for, were there?
Not this far in advance. However, there were some field trips from last year where we asked that the vendor hold the funds in case sophomores or juniors may be able to utilize the funds this year. And so for that reason, because we're still in remote, we're in some cases having to obtain refunds from the vendors and then providing refunds to students and parents.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Anybody else? Director Berg.
And I just had a question about page 6, Ruth, and just with the assumptions on the revenues and transfers. So is there an assumption there about school restarting as well as the ones that you've listed, or is it just the ones you've listed?
Yes, the assumptions for school restarting is more on the expenditure page. So we are assuming that there will be some level of ramping up staff and so on for restart here coming up in the next couple of months.
Okay, so that's kind of baked into some of these numbers in addition to
Yes.
and other support mechanisms kicking in. Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other hands or hearing any other voices, although I'm only on page 1. There's 2 pages on our Zoom now. So I'm going to go ahead and thank Ruth for the presentation and bringing the numbers to us once again. And at this point, we are at a break, and I am showing 6:50 on my clock, and we are scheduled to have a 15-minute break. So I will look forward to seeing everyone back at 7:05. Thank you. And I see the red recording button going. So I'd like to welcome everyone back from our big break. And we are now moving on to the second item of section 12.0 information and discussion. And we are going to be presented with an update on the strategic planning refresh process. And I believe that Mr. Gunn is going to kick it off and introduce Martha back once again to us.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, tonight we are excited to bring you an update on the process to refresh our strategic plan. Earlier this evening, our superintendent said this will be a better 2021, a better year than last year. And part of the reason, in my view, that it is going to be a better year is because we will have a new strategic plan. As you know, developing a new or refresh strategic plan is something we don't do very often. This process gives us an opportunity to take a fresh look at our environment, and our performance and have some conversations with our stakeholders and community about how we're doing. The really exciting part of this for me is that the result will be a strategic plan that will align and drive our work over the next 5 years or more and help transform us and our work in ways that can significantly improve student achievement. Like our study session in September, I will be providing the introductory comments. Martha Greenway, our strategic planning consultant, is here tonight with us to present the material and facilitate the conversation. And I will, of course, be present and available during the discussions as needed. So Martha, could you go to the next slide then, please? Okay, so the objectives of the presentation tonight are to, once again, to provide you an update on the process that we're going through. We are at the completion of the analysis phase, which is the first of 3 phases in this process. Martha's going to present some of the engagement, talk about the engagement that we've had with our community and specific groups, and then also spend quite a bit of time walking you through the data, the performance data of our district and our students. And then Martha will share with you the proposed framework, which includes priority student outcomes and strategic themes. And she'll provide you with that along with the context of other school districts, what they've done and how they've used that. And then also to review the next steps. And of course, this will be an opportunity for questions and comments by board members. Martha will go through this, but I wanted to emphasize there is not an action item that we're requesting tonight. We're not asking for your approval. We're giving you an opportunity for questions and comments. With that, I'll ask Martha to go ahead and provide the presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike. And I will reiterate that this is a step in the process before we take this framework out for further stakeholder engagement. And our intent is to update the board and ensure that you have a thorough understanding before we take this draft out for further community input. And so I'll go over this briefly. As Mike mentioned, we're wrapping up the analysis phase and moving into our strategy development phase. At this evening, we would like to affirm the mission statement, share with you a set of draft priority outcomes and strategic themes, which would then be tested with the community. And then we would move into the remaining steps of the strategy development phase of developing the objectives, the measures, the strategic initiatives, and then finally in April through June, get into the detailed action plans, implementation, budgets, and the monitoring and review process. I am sharing this with you as an example of what we will be working toward through this process. This is a school district in Lawrence, Kansas. It's about the same size as you all are in Everett. And we are working on a set of priority student outcomes that reflect what the data and stakeholder input convey are the greatest opportunities for the district to leverage results over this next 5-year period. So these aren't intended to reflect a scorecard that measures all areas of district performance, but rather the outcomes toward which the actions of the strategic plan will be focused. And these will emerge from your data and stakeholder input. And then you see a set of strategic themes which reflect for this specific district where there are opportunities to enhance, redesign, or build district practice in ways that will enhance the work of the district so that the priority student outcomes are achieved. So we're building a model such as this specific to Everett Public Schools. You will also see in this example from Lawrence that they chose to position equity as integrated throughout each strategic theme and avoiding isolating it as a separate strand of projects and tasks that were unrelated from the overall work of the district. Ultimately, after we test with the community and bring any revisions back for board approval, We will then move into setting within each strategic theme specific measurable objectives for the progress that the district wants to attain within the strategic planning period and the specific strategic initiatives that are the multi-year systemic change efforts that will be implemented. And as you can see, those will be phased over time so that not all of them will be implemented on top of each other, but to ensure quality implementation. And so I want to begin this presentation by just grounding everybody in some demographic information about the district, which is important to understand as we reflect on the district's progress. And so you can see that you are about 50% white. Your next largest demographic group from an ethnic or racial standpoint are Hispanic Latinx students, followed by Asian. About 40% of your students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and about 14.5% of them are English learners. As we look at this over time, what we see is that you have seen a reduction in the proportion of white students in the district, that's the blue line, over the last 10 years, and an increase in the proportion of Hispanic students and of low-income students. We looked at the student results on standards in grades 3 and 5, and what we see here is that these have increased steadily, except for science. And you'll see we've placed a line here on our chart because the standards and assessment in science change significantly. And so that is a factor that has to be considered when we look at a trend over time. When we look at grades 8 and 10, we do see that there are some increases steadily as well, with the exception that 10th grade English language arts has actually declined. And I will point out that 10th grade math, the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding expectations is significantly lower than any other assessment in terms of the percent meeting or exceeding. In this next slide, we want to explore the achievement gap. And because income level has such great influence on levels of achievement, we want to look at racial and ethnic categories in tandem with whether or not students are receiving free or reduced lunch, which we're labeling here as low income. And so what we see when we look at 3rd grade English language arts, which is really a benchmark for literacy, is that the largest gap based on income is among your Hispanic Latinx students, with almost 36% of students lower are meeting that expectation among low-income Hispanic Latinx students than among those who are not. However, also note that for the African American and the Hispanic Latinx students, regardless of income level, so if we compare just the solid bars and just the striped bars, we see that those two student groups perform at lower levels regardless of income. We see the same pattern in math at 3rd grade. And when we get to 8th grade, we see the same pattern in English language arts. But you will note that in math, the gap increases now for Asian students based on income. And the gap for Hispanic and Latinx students is the same. However, the performance levels are dramatically lower. So the difference in performance among your African American and Hispanic Latinx students, regardless of income level, those comparative gaps with other groups are now even more dramatic than in other grade levels. And by the time we get to 10th grade, we start to see this effect of the overall percentage meeting the standards being lower reflected, particularly among your low-income students. However, you'll also notice that the gap in the racial ethnic groups of African American and Hispanic and Latinx is even more dramatic now than it has been in any other grade and subject. The other thing that we wanted to look at was the district performance compared to other districts within Washington State that you tend to compare to. So when we look at 3rd grade, what we see is that the district is performing at at higher rates in terms of percentage of students meeting standards than all districts except for Bellevue, Issaquah, and North Shore. And I will point out that those districts have a percentage of students on free and reduced lunch right around 10%, and you have 40%. So they are fairly different in terms of the student makeup. However, when we get to grade 8, we notice that there are some additional districts that are outperforming Everett in math. And I will point out that those two districts have student percentages on free and reduced lunch at about the same rate as Everett does. And Everett is also performing lower than several districts in science, which is the green line. And then when we get to 10th grade, we find that the comparative performance of Everett against these other school districts is now even lower, and that there are several other school districts, particularly in math and science, that are outperforming grade 10 in terms of the percentage of students who are meeting standards. We're going to now move to high school performance. And what we see is that in the last school year, almost 70% of high school students took one or more dual credit course. Dual credit attainment is a significant factor in post-secondary success. So this is a real accomplishment of the district and something that you all should be quite proud of. College and the high school and advanced placement were the most common forms of dual enrollment credit. We have also put completers on this chart. It's not exactly the same thing as dual enrollment credit, but it does reflect students who graduate with a career certification or career pathway completion. You will also note in the footnotes over here that for those where we don't have a tremendous amount of participation, we did just make some comments about difference in types of students participating. Asian and white students participate in Running Start at more than twice the rate of other students, and very few low-income students participate. These types of programs are actually real accelerators for students who are low income to get a head start, if you will, or a running start on college attainment, and can make a real difference in terms of post-secondary attainment. So that is definitely something to be looking out for. We see that your Asian and American Indian students are enrolled in AP in college and the high school at greater rates than other students, while your Hispanic students are most likely to be career pathway completers. Your high school graduation rates have increased steadily. We know that this has been a focus of the district, and so this really demonstrates that when the district puts its mind to attaining success, it can see dramatic results. Additionally, when we look at this disaggregated by student groups, we do see that with the exception of Pacific Islander and American Indian students, rates for all students have increased, and rates for African American students have shown the greatest increases. I will also just comment that you have a fairly low proportion of students that are Pacific Islander and American Indian, and so a slight fluctuation of a few students can affect the overall percentage graduation rate for those populations. So it's highly volatile because there's so few students. We looked at your graduation rates against the districts in Washington that we had spoken about earlier, but we also added here several other districts across the country that have similar demographics or community profiles as you do. And you can see that you are outperforming almost all of them, and you are well above the US average for the four-year cohort graduation rate. Now, when we look at your SAT scores, moving beyond high school to thinking about preparation for college and career, what we do see is that with your SAT scores, your African American and Hispanic and low-income students have significantly lower results. And so this is representing the percentage that meet the English and writing benchmark. So EBRW is essentially the English and writing assessments. And then on the SAT math, we see that same pattern where the African American and Hispanic and low income students are getting significantly lower percentages that are meeting that benchmark, which demonstrates college readiness. We can then use the data from the National Student Clearinghouse that you all participate in to see what happens when students leave high school and what the percentage of what we call seamless enrollment would be. So seamless enrollment are students who graduate and then enter college in the semester right after high school graduation. So we will note first that your students enrolled in college at lower rates than comparable high schools across the nation during the fall after the 2018 high school graduation, which is the most recent year for which there are data. We are comparing you to other high schools that are considered higher income low minority, meaning that they have fewer than 50% of students on free or reduced lunch and fewer than 40% Black or Hispanic, which does apply to you. You'll also note that your distribution of students is a little more heavily toward four-year, but you've got almost a 50-50 split between students entering seamlessly first into two-year and four-year colleges. Asian students seamlessly enroll at significantly higher rates than other student groups, and low-income and Hispanic students are enrolling in two-year colleges at greater proportions than four-year. Sorry, seem to have lost my, there we go. This data shows students who persist, meaning that they attend college the second year, not necessarily at the same school, but they are still enrolled in a second year. Here we see that you have higher levels of persistence than comparable schools, with the exception of two-year public colleges. So if your students do seamlessly enroll, they seem to do well. This slide shows the percentage of those who seamlessly enroll who then gained a degree within 6 years. Now, please keep in mind, since this is cohort data, these are 2011 high school graduates who enrolled in college in 2011. And so you see that you had about 50% who attained a degree after 6 years, and the national data is 51%. Asian students are most likely to complete, and they're also proportionally more likely to gain a bachelor's degree versus an associate's. We're now going to look at a few other data points, and then I will quickly share some of the stakeholder feedback we received. American Indian students were more likely to experience out-of-school disciplinary consequences in 2018-19, and students with disabilities, African American, and low-income students have had higher rates of out-of-school disciplinary consequences over time. Data shows that this significantly affects students' ability to have academic success and graduate on time. Another focus of the district has been diversity in hiring. And so this slide does show that your diverse hires have increased, particularly among the certificated staff in 2019-20. Your overall retention rate has declined between 2014 and 2018. Now, this does need a little more data to understand exactly what factors are contributing that, but it has gone from a retention rate of 89.3, a high of almost 93%, to about 85%. I'm going to switch gears now, and in our last few minutes, talk about the stakeholder input that we received regarding the district's strengths and assets and weaknesses and opportunities for improvement. So there was an online community survey that was accessible to anyone. You will see we had a total of 1,240 respondents. You can see how those respondents array by role. Respondents could pick multiple roles, so those numbers add up to slightly more than the total. Because there were so few general community members that we don't really consider that reflective of the community at large, in the data that I'm about to show you, we're not going to include the community member results. So this first slide shows the overall assets of Everett Public Schools as indicated by those scoring a 5 out of 5. So I should mention that the items on the list emerged after we reviewed numerous years of data that were collected through prior surveys that the district has done with stakeholders, as well as the input gathered through Dr. Salzman's listening and learning sessions when he arrived as superintendent. Over 30% of all respondents rated district and school staff committed to student learning and high quality teaching and learning as areas that they strongly agreed with. Everyone except for the students rated effective school leadership over 30%, as well as district communication, safe and orderly schools, high standards and expectations, continuous improvement of district and school efforts, and effective district leadership. And so you're really seeing that there's a lot of positivity around some of the performance of the district. And the students also rated highly the learning opportunities in STEM. So we're going to move now to talk about the areas where people see opportunities for improvement. And here we see that we have kind of less overall agreement. The one area where more than 30% of respondents all agreed is support for student mental health and or social emotional learning. Parents and teachers are more concerned about overcrowding of schools and classrooms than are students or district administrators. I also want to call attention to cultural awareness and inclusion, which is about halfway down the list. Here we have about 30% and more when we look at some of the groups rating that as strongly agree, but that is not as rated as highly by parents. So as the district works in this effort, I think that's something also to be aware of, as well as career-connected learning. That is rated as a strongly agree opportunity for improvement, with the exception of parents and teachers. We interviewed a variety of stakeholders that the district recommended that we speak to. And you can see their names here. We also did focus groups with the Equity and Access Committee and the Financial Advisory Committee. And I'm going to quickly summarize at a very high level what we heard from those groups. So the assets and strength really reflect the positive outcomes we saw in the data, the appreciation of the stable and talented leadership, the reputation in the community and communication and engagement is an area where stakeholders see great progress, and they are very appreciative of the efforts that the district has made most recently to really enhance those areas. Under challenges and opportunities for improvement, while people are pleased with the level of emphasis on community engagement and input, they believe that there could still be more, particularly around families and community members that may not be directly engaged in the district, as well as those who might have barriers in terms of language or other methods of access. Strong concerns about the North and South divide and the perception that these are actually operating as separate and not as a unified school district. Stronger partnerships with higher ed and post-secondary. School district personnel should be more reflective of the community. Comments and the data support that a very small percentage of administrators and teachers actually live in the district. Gaps in equity and opportunities to expand innovation. And so one thing that we definitely heard is the desire for innovation on the part of the district, and a sense that given its high performance, strong reputation, and excellent leadership, that perhaps Everett should be more on the leading edge of some innovative opportunities. And there's a sense that there's some risk aversion that the district doesn't kind of want to be always the one that's the first to try something. And so the community is interested in some more innovation and testing. Some community trends that are not necessarily things the district can control, but things that you need to be aware of as you are planning for the future. And you can see those listed here. These are things that we hear in many places. They're not unique to you, but they're certainly things that you do need to address. Now, I will say that the high dependence on the aerospace industry is something specific that you need to consider. And then you'll see the suggested actions here around collaboration, career focus, particularly around emerging industries, seamless integration with the post-secondary institutions in the community, that continued emphasis on the outreach and transparency, responding and leveraging the diversity, which is viewed as a strength, but also an area that the district really needs to continue to evolve. And that gets to this next one about leading and thriving in a racially diverse workplace and community, deepening support for students, and then also focusing on key things. So resisting the temptation to try to be everything for everyone. And so we reflected on the mission and vision, and there's nothing that we've heard so far that would call on us to revise those. The mission is well stated. The vision really seems to reflect what the community is saying they're interested in. So at this point, we would not recommend evolving those. And so as we think then about the strategic plan framework that would guide the next steps, the priority student outcomes that emerged through a facilitated session that we held with the district leadership brought these forward. So ensuring third grade literacy. I'm sure, as the board knows, third grade literacy is really the basis by which students access curriculum from that point forward. And you have overall fairly favorable percentages passing or meeting standards. But when we look at that disaggregated data, you clearly have some gaps that are leaving students behind. Increased science achievement and math achievement overall are clearly reflected as areas that you need to address. And the group did point out that as students move forward in time across the curriculum, the math scores tend to decline. Reducing gaps in achievement among those student groups, ensuring students are prepared to succeed in college and career, and strengthen student wellness, engagement, and safety. And so as we then talked about how, where are the areas where the district needs to enhance its work to attain those outcomes, these are the areas that would be recommended for focus. Student engagement in and ownership of learning. So this also includes the career focus. It includes student voice and choice in learning. It includes things that get students engaged and excited and interested in becoming lifelong learners. Effective instructional practices. Really ensuring that those are up to date, that those are evolving, that those are most current. And this would also include attention to virtual learning opportunities and strengthening those, even as we return to in-person instruction. I think current environment has allowed us to see that there are opportunities to enhance instruction, perhaps through some remote and virtual tools. Equitable access to resources to support student learning. So one of the things we clearly heard from stakeholders is that not all students are able to avail themselves of the same opportunities. And that is a concern that definitely needs to be addressed as a mechanism of achieving these outcomes. Strategic theme 4, consistency and accountability for key processes affecting student success that are balanced with differentiation and innovation. So while the community wants innovation and they want focused instruction that addresses student interest and needs, what we've also heard is that the culture of the district has in some ways fostered a disconnection in processes and a lack of consistency in some areas that all students should be guaranteed similar practices. And so the first effort here would be to have a conversation about what we, if you will, hold tight and what we let loose. But where are there things that in order to ensure student success, there needs to be a guaranteed approach regardless of which classroom or school the student attends. Community engagement, particularly in strategic theme 5, particularly with an emphasis on populations that may have barriers around language or other access issues, but also ensuring that the community at large is consistently informed and engaged in the work of the district. And then in order to support these strategic themes, really addressing the human capital recruitment, development, and retention so that we have the right people in place that can support this work. I'm going to pause in a moment and ask the board for comments and feedback on the strategic plan framework, which we hope really results and represents the story we told from the needs as conveyed from the stakeholders and the data. But I do also want to share that as we move into implementation, that these additional areas that you see on the side of equity, cultural awareness, and responsive practices would be integrated throughout all 6 strategic themes. And our experience in other districts shows quite clearly that that is the most effective way to consider this, because they are part and parcel to all of the work that we've laid out here and should not be their own separate strategic theme, which often results in disconnected kind of one-off practices or trainings or policies that are not then embedded in the actual work of the district. So I just want to share quickly, after we get the board's feedback tonight, what is going to happen. There are a number of sessions already scheduled for feedback on the strategic plan framework, including 2 Let's Connect sessions that will be open to all stakeholders. And in those sessions, stakeholders will be asked to share what works well about the framework, if there's anything they disagree with. Other than strategic initiatives and performance metrics, which we will work on in the next phase, is there anything they think is critical to address the future needs of the students that is missing from the strategic plan framework? And then finally, within each of those strategic themes, we're going to offer people the opportunity to share ideas they have about approaches that would support those priority student outcomes. And so after that, the executive leadership will review that output. They would make any recommendations to changes to that framework based on the community input. We would bring that to the board on February 18th, which I know is a workshop, but I believe that we're going to arrange that you will actually be able to take action at that meeting so that we can continue our forward progress. And then February and March, internal strategy teams will develop strategic initiatives using that stakeholder input. And then in April through June, we would then move into sequencing the strategic initiatives, developing those action plans, and defining the performance metrics and targets. So at this point, I'm going to turn it kind of back to Dr. Saltzman if he wants to make any closing comments before we then ask the board open it up for board discussion on the strategic plan framework.
Sure. Thank you, Martha. And to our board and to our public, it's so important that we have a strategic plan as we move forward with the work. And it's a 5-year plan. And it's just very important that everybody sees the work that we're going to do and improve on. So I'll turn it now to Chairwoman Mason and for questions from the board and Mike Gunn. But just want to again thank you, Martha, so much. And to our public, we're going to have a strategic plan that everybody could see, be transparent, and how we can continue doing good work for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saltzman, and thank you, Martha, for the presentation. I deeply appreciate the lens on some metrics that we have actually not seen, and the comparison more on a national level of very similar type districts to really better understand where we are with some of our initiatives. So I really appreciate you bringing that to the table tonight. And my biggest wondering throughout all of this presentation has been, how has the pandemic influenced this? You know, because we're going out and we're asking people what they think of the district at a point in time, and our district looks very different than it did a year ago or 2 years ago. And even with Dr. Saltzman on board, there's definitely been a shift toward instruction, and whether the community has actually recognized that, or whether we're sort of where the perceptions lay, how far back do we go? And so I wanted to say thank you. And as I look at your list of strategic themes, I feel like it is a really succinct list that encapsulates much of what we've been talking about in the last year about where we want our district to go. And I see things here that in my 7 years with the district, I have not seen before in terms of bringing more focus to. So I like this list a lot, I guess is what I'm saying, but I would like to go ahead and open it up to other directors and student representatives. And I'm kind of torn because I want the list up, but I also want to be able to see people in terms of being able to call on them. So What I would ask maybe is directors and student representatives, I can hear you, I can't see you. So if you have something to say, if you could please just speak up.
This is Director Lassane. I had one question. I'd like to find out from Mike. When I look at the different number of themes that we have, how does that compare with the number of, I mean, if you can compare it to what we've had in the current strategic plan themes, and how would you say, what would you say is the right number, or what would you say is just too many themes to focus in on in these next 5 years? Did you understand?
So I'm going to go ahead and take the first part of that. Right now, our current strategic plan has 5 strategic priorities. And then underneath each of those 5 priorities, we have, let's see, we have 37 key performance outcomes and 18 strategic goals. So we have a lot under our current strategic plan. So with that, I'll ask Martha to join in terms of how many is the right number, or?
Yeah, thank you. And so one thing I do want to just acknowledge about this strategic plan framework that is an evolution from your current strategic plan is that this strategic plan framework focuses squarely on student outcomes, and it calls out the areas of the district work that require strategic transformation in order to address those outcomes. It is not intended to reflect continuous improvement for all parts of the organization. And your prior strategic plan really was an approach to create an effective and efficient operating system. And so there are things in that strategic plan that at this point in time, based on our observations and research, are really in a continuous improvement mode. You know, they're not in a redesign, recreate, recovery mode. And so those areas of the district can now move into an annual operational planning that happens as part of perhaps the annual budget process and performance review process that don't need to be raised up to the level of a strategic plan. And so that, I think, is an evolution. So in our experience, I will say that 6 strategic themes is about the max that you want to have. The strategic initiatives that will evolve are going to be multi-year transformational projects that will really change the practice of the district. And so we also don't want a whole lot of those. And the right number about that is about 25 over a 5-year period to try to roll out and fully implement. So you're going to have bigger and impactful areas, but not as many and not as operational in focus with this proposed strategic plan framework. And I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. And may I make one comment? My computer is about to restart, so I will probably be coming back in on my home computer. So if you notice that I've left the room, but I've re-entered the room. So that's technology for you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of questions and a comment. So I guess first off, my comment, I suppose, Martha, thank you so much. This is an amazing presentation and body of data and work, and it makes me feel really good to see it all captured here. It makes me feel like I'm not going crazy because you've captured a lot of the things that I've seen and heard from parents, being a parent in my parent bubble, but also being a stakeholder and a leader in the district. It feels like you've really captured the emotion of what folks are feeling. That said, I just want clarification on the college data, and just so I'm understanding the numbers. So when we're looking at that 4-year, like the graduation rate of kiddos going from high school into a 4-year college, that's about 35%, right? Like just looking at that raw data. And then the next step would be that 6-year data. So am I seeing it right that based, even though it's 2011, I know it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but of that 35%, 36% of those folks are completing 4-year college. Is that right?
So it's actually 2 and 4 year combined on.
Yeah, well, it was 2 and 4 year combined at 51, right? But if you broke it out, wasn't it?
So the difference there is not whether they went to 2 or 4 year, it's whether they attained an associate's or a bachelor's degree.
Got it.
Right. So it's not exactly matched up there. And we are limited in the data that we can provide by what the National Student Clearinghouse reports. And so just to make kind of that methodology clear, the district gives a student roster to a national organization that then has a partnership with 95% of the post-secondary institutions in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They match those.
Yep.
And that's how we know where the students went. But we're kind of limited in the data as to how they define things and what they send back. And so what we don't know for the district, I can find it nationally, but what we could maybe dig into a little bit more for the district is what the 6-year completion rate is for those who started a 4-year school versus those who started a 2-year school.
Yeah, and that would be great. I don't want to, burden you with that task. I think I'm just trying to make sure I understand just the data, just big picture. So even if we just took that 50%, it's 50% of the people who went, right? So if you had
exactly,
so if you had 50% going to a 2 and a 4-year college, of that 50% go, right? So if you have, 50 kiddos out of 100, then you've got 25 that actually at 6 years have completed either a 2 or 4-year degree.
Yeah, and we have actually done for districts that math. So it's like a multi-tier funnel, right? First, they have to graduate from high school. Then they have to seamlessly enroll. So it's only those who seamlessly enroll who are then included in the rest of the cohort.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to complete 6 years later. So, the funnel gets narrower.
So I guess I'm just trying to make sure, because when I look at the OSPI data, I'm assuming you've got some of your data points from there, and it looks like it's great seeing this in one snapshot, because when I try and digest all the OSPI data, and then from there, I've looked at the 8-year data and it matches what you're saying. So it's just, what I'm seeing is that we do have, it seems like when I look at neighboring districts, even like Marysville, North Shore, which are 2 very diverse districts socioeconomically, we still are coming out a little bit lower than either of those districts when it comes to like that 8-year completion rate. I haven't seen a 6-year one. So I just want to make sure I've got my numbers straight.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. But thank you.
Sure.
If I may take off on that thing too, because it does, this was some like Caroline said, some data we haven't seen before, and some of it was hard to see in our earlier discussion. How do we ensure, especially with our plan of, that Kids Ready for Life, that we are setting kids up for success at their community college, at their 4-year university, so that they have the skills to do it. But then also I'd like to see, and I don't know if I just missed it, some kids do drop out because of financial reasons. And we do have the financial ability here in Washington with some of the grants and things if they stay in state. But I know we can't always get the why kids don't succeed, but I really sure would like with this plan, how do we make sure kids are set up for success, that they have the skills to be successful at a community college or a college or, military, wherever they go. That there are definitely some high schools across the country where it is, college bound is the goal. I think we are more aware in our area that every student is not appropriate at 18 for college or university. That military is an option, that direct a career, but how do we just make sure they're successful? So thank you for showing us some of this hard data to see.
Sure.
So looking at the the areas of opportunity, it looks like, and it just so happens to be a passion area of mine, that the biggest area of agreement around that was around mental health support, social emotional learning. Were there any specific kind of consistent themes that you got in the feedback around that area, like what they're needing, like more mental health counselors in the schools, or just kind of this general sense of supporting mental health care?
Right. So no, we did not get a lot of specifics in this phase about the details of what people are looking for. That, I think, opportunity around that question will come up in this next phase of input, where we ask more precisely, what ideas do you have for approaches the district should take? So the survey data that we showed, it was a close-ended survey. So they really did not have an opportunity to elaborate other than just indicate their level of agreement with that statement that they saw. And I don't feel like we did enough stakeholder focus groups or interviews to really extrapolate from that. But during this next phase of stakeholder engagement, I trust we'll have really broad participation and should get some great ideas back from that.
I was just going to jump in, if it's okay, Director Nichols, because you bring up a really good point, and I recall seeing that data now, and I'm not really seeing it reflected in our strategic themes here. And maybe, Martha, you could elaborate a little bit how that's woven in, or why it's not like one of its own kind of thing.
So I think the intent is that those approaches would belong under student engagement. And so as we think about what we do to support strengthening student wellness, engagement, and safety, the work to be done actually falls under multiple of these themes, but I would really see that thread of work coming out under student engagement as actions that the adults in the district can take to ensure that there are not barriers to students fully engaging in learning.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but
go ahead.
I mean, it seems like it would be more appropriate for like specifically theme number 3, and then also play into theme number 6 as well, as far as, you know, potential hiring practices.
Right. So as I mentioned, I think it could come across through multiple themes. Theme 3 is really about ensuring that once the district determines, this is our theory of what students should have in order to attain these outcomes, that all students have equitable access to them. So that would mean equitable access to counselors, equitable access to external mental health partnerships, and so forth. So it could play out in multiple places, but in our conversations with the community, I think that's where we will get the ideas of the more specific initiatives that would need to emerge.
Look forward to hearing about it.
I do too. And I guess I think as you talk about equitable access, if we don't have it, there is no access. So I would be interested in understanding what, you know, to Director Nichols' point of view, what that means, what it looks like, just to make sure that we actually have that access so that the students that are in need of it can get there.
And let me also comment that, you know, this is the kind of conversation that we really want to engage in those stakeholder sessions, which will be facilitated conversations, so that if, as I just interpreted, well, here's what I think student engagement would mean and why that would be where these things would fall. If the community does not interpret that language to represent those concepts that are important to them, then that's what we'll bring back to the board and say, hey, this didn't land. This does not convey what we intended. We need to find different words.
And I think it's important to, you know, as we engage community, and I'm not sure if you're referring to community as just all stakeholders or outside of school community, but that, you know, the people, I guess, for lack of a better term, where the rubber hits the road, that are, you know, working directly day in and day out with students, really have an impactful voice in this, on that topic in particular, I guess.
Yes. Yes, and there are opportunities for, when I talk about community, it's really inclusive of parents, teachers, students, administrators.
Yeah.
So President Mason, I have a follow-up question just based on this dialogue. And so Martha, would this be kind of an example, our conversation around mental health resources, and, will involve stakeholders, have these continual conversations, but there was that sense of we're not innovative enough, like we don't take enough action and being at the forefront. So if we go through this process and as a board and as a district, we say, we want to do something innovative based on that. Would that be a point of taking action? I guess what I'm asking is it your role to tell us, okay, you should implement X, Y, and Z mental health services, or is it our role to say, hey, we've heard these things from the community, we know these resources are out there, we've engaged with these stakeholders, here's a great way for us to do X?
Right. So when we move from this phase and we get all of that input from all of the constituents about what kinds of approaches and ideas they have, then we will form cross-functional strategy teams of district staff around each strategic theme. We're going to take them through a protocol that we utilize, and we'll train them and we will coach them. And they're going to do the research and discovery and recommendations. So it's not our belief that I should come in from the outside and say, hey, here's this proven program, I think you ought to do this, because we know that doesn't work. It's really got to be grounded in the community and the people who are going to have to implement the work to then surface after doing research, making sure they're based on effective practice, that they've been demonstrated elsewhere, to bring those forward to the board and say, here are the ideas through the superintendent. Here are the things we believe are our best bets to really make a measurable impact and change district practice in these areas. So that's the mechanism that we will use. And there's also opportunity in those teams for specific stakeholder engagement to give feedback about specific initiative ideas from those who might be most directly affected. So it's the stakeholder input kind of continues as we go forward in the design.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. I need to ask both Ms. Greenway and Mr. Gunn if you have what you need at this point. Do you have any further questions of us?
No, I really appreciate your insights. You've also given us some things to maybe think about more in terms of digging into some data at the next phases. And I will really be interested in seeing what your stakeholders have to say about this and bringing that synthesis and any recommended changes back to you.
Great, thank you.
And I don't have any further comments. I appreciate, again, all of the thought that went into the comments, and we'll proceed.
Thank you, both of you, for being here, especially you, Martha. I think you're a little off time zone, and it's a late evening for you to be able to give such a great presentation. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha.
All right. You're welcome.
I'm about to sneeze. Sorry, hang on. Okay. So we are on to moving towards section 13.0, which is unfinished business. And tonight we do not have any unfinished business, which brings us to new business. And we have 5 policy reviews tonight. Nope, 4 policy reviews tonight and a schedule to approve or to look over. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fleckenstein and go ahead and just sort of, as we answer questions, go ahead and just proceed to the next one as usual.
Thank you. To begin, new policy 2005, school improvement plans, is presented this evening to fulfill the statutory requirement now that our Washington School Improvement Framework, or WASIF goals, are embedded in our school improvement plans, which as in a existing policy 2004 accountability goals establish that requirement for the district.
Directors or student representatives, are there any questions regarding this policy? Hearing none, we will move policy 2005 to the next reading.
The next three policies are all the same similar revision. The reason why they are before you this evening is because as we've updated and streamlined our school transfer process to go to an online process, removing all the paper so people can access it directly from home, we've needed to update our policy language to eliminate those old practices. So to begin in 3131, you'll see that the changed language here is eliminating old practice and updating it to providing the online access to OSPI's annual information about school enrollment. And then our websites have been updated for those online applications. Similar revision here in 3104. Again, removing the old information that we used to have posted paper access and now having that OSPI annual information on our website for parents to access as well. And then finally, the same for 3141, which is our non-resident student transfer policy. Two revisions here. The first one is, again, the information about OSPI's annual information for school enrollment, and also a reference to the choice transfer system that is maintained by the state, where students who are asking to come to Everett Public Schools from an outside school district, that is the portal by which they make their application first and are released from their district, and then we review their application.
Larry, I do very much like the idea that you have the statement in there. If needed, a request will be made for the annual information to be provided in written form. During this procedure, is there any way we can capture how many parents or families are requesting things in written form? That might be an indication of whether they do not have capability to go online, and what we have to do in order to make sure their student has online capability.
Yes, we do have the option to print and provide in paper form any of these documents still. We have, like you said, put that online. With our students currently right now in our one-to-one initiative in the district, here in remote learning, each of our students would have access from home to these forms.
Some may have the computer, but they may not have the capability of having online, but it tells us more than just giving the kids the capability. It tells us also if their parents may not be have the tools to adequately resource information online, and where additional support may be necessary for their parents.
Mm-hmm. You know, what I can do in the school transfers office, if they're contacted for a written form, I can have the transfers assistant keep a log of that. If that's information that you.
I'm just saying one other way, because as we go to more and more information online, this might be a good way in which we can capture how many parents in the district, for whatever reason, not just because they know their student has the capability of getting their information online because they have a computer, but they may not have capability to get the Wi-Fi, mm-hmm. or their parents may just not be computer savvy. And it gives us ways in which we can help educate parents as well as give them the resources they need. Mm-hmm. What I've learned in this last year is very good. We've learned how to do so much online. And there are still some families who feel that, you know, their kids are still lacking. And there are still some people out there that may not have that capability or desire to go online. And we still want to be able to support our students, but sometimes we may have to support the family in order to support students.
Yes, I agree with you, Director Lusane, if I understand your question. Serving people in person, providing them written copies, whether it be paper form, is something we will still be able to do. If they were to come into the district office, we would help them at the front desk and we would get them that information. Or if they were to call and be transferred into the transfers office, we would get that to them. I think what it is important to know is in the context of a school transfer request, and these are people who are asking for a school transfer only, we would really only be tracking the information you're describing for people who are interested in obtaining a school transfer. It would not be information that would give us a district-wide view. It would only provide us information about a narrow kind of slice of people who are looking for a school change. So I don't know.
I understand, but it was the bigger picture when I saw all three and that you still had that sentence in there. I thought that was great. This gives us an opportunity to be able to track if people are asking for something in writing, maybe they don't have online capability and how we can better serve them. And so I just said, I was very happy that you put that statement in all of your policies. And that was one way in which I looked at, we would then have a capability to find out how many people are continually asking for the student handbook in written form. How many people are asking for any kind of information in written form. If they're going out, that's fine. That's okay, we've lost them. But if they're coming in to our district, how can we better ensure that we are supporting students as well as families when they have been asking for things in written form?
I appreciate what you're saying, Dr. Lusane. I don't know quite what the question is. If you're asking, do we track the information when people ask for it in writing? We don't currently do that.
That's all.
And I would also, one thing that we've done a little bit better with the pandemic is get devices and connectivity into our students' hands. And so, you know, if a student, well, I feel like there's been some improvement made in that area. I'm not sure we can ensure that every parent has access, but I appreciate your comments.
Good on you, Larry, for putting that sentence in there. Good on you, is what I'm saying.
Well, we want to make sure if people don't have online access, we still have a means of providing the information. And that concludes my presentation for this evening, directors.
And I've got a question, Mr. Fleckenstein. Just a quick one. I noticed in one of the policies, I think it was 3140, the one on my screen, it has a way for folks to do an appeal process. Has that language been moved into a different procedure or policy?
So the release of resident students, if that's one you're referring to, or is it 3141?
Yeah, it's 3140, page 2, and it talks about if the request is denied, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and so the release of a student to attend another school district, the first step is, let's say there's somebody in our boundaries, and as you probably know, they want to go, I'm going to make something up and say they're going to Marysville. They'd like to go to Marysville.
Mm-hmm.
We have to release them first before Marysville can even see their application.
Okay.
I am not aware of an instance that we have not released a student who's requested it.
Okay. So we basically got rid of the language because it's not a situation where it would be utilized. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we've not had, I guess if a family is looking to seek another school district for whatever the reason may be, and there's a multitude of reasons.
Yeah.
Somebody can do that for, we would not want to create a barrier for a child to pursue an option that they think is the best fit for their kids, right? We would, of course, work with families if there was a reason why they don't want to attend Everett public schools, right? We would work with families as to understanding those reasons why they may want to release. But this is procedurally really just talking about the process of the student release so another district can see their information.
No, I totally understand that. I'm just wondering why we took out the language. So it sounds like we took it out because it's not something that it would ever be applicable. I just found that we
no longer would we no longer do that practice anymore.
And the only reason, why I was asking is normally when you take something out, you're like, oh yeah, it's over in this other procedure. We just codified it in a different way. But in this situation, you just cleaned it up, basically saying, look, this never happens. Let's just take it out so folks don't get confused. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it's old language that created barriers.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, then I suggest we move policy 3131, 3140, and 3141 to second reading. And we do have 1405 schedule, and that is our 2021 school board, regular school board meeting schedule. And I would ask whether directors, we had discussions around, oh wait, sorry. We're looking at the 21-22. I apologize. We've already approved our 2021 schedule. If directors had any comments on any of the meeting dates, our policy states that we typically meet twice a month, which is the second and fourth Tuesday of the month, which aligns with all of these dates with the exception of the months where we only meet once. And we did have some discussion around the July meeting because we like to move it if it makes it more convenient in terms of around the 4th of July holiday and people being out of town. In particular, this year, it does not. It falls on a Tuesday, I believe, and July 4th is on a Monday. And the prior date the week before is July 1st, which is a Friday, which is probably not a very good date as well, given the holiday weekend, 3-day weekend. And then to push it out further, we decided that would probably start to cut into July vacation. So anyhow, I open it up for discussion if anyone has any comments or concerns. Okay, I'm hearing none, so we're going to move that to second reading as well, which takes us on to upcoming agenda items. Dr. Salzman, can you please give us an overview?
Yes, at the January 19th special meeting, the board will discuss the following: instructional review summary. And at the January 26th meeting, I-Ready update, performance matters implementation update, the board annual regular meeting schedule for 2021-22, several policies for second reading, school board recognition month and recognition for our special board of directors, and a school reopening update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are on to 16.0, which is executive or closed session. And tonight we have neither, which takes us to 17.0, which is adjournment. So at this point in time, I would like to go ahead and adjourn the January 12th, 2021 regular board meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. Thank you, everyone, for hanging.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I enjoyed
Thank
this meeting. Very informative. Thank you all.
Have a great night.
You too. Have a good night.